Hey everyone, Anark here with another Friday live stream. Did I do it? Did the live stream start without a hitch? Did it work? No. Wait, it did. It worked. Fantastic. Okay, now I have to start linking this everywhere, right? That's step number one with every one of these live streams. I think I'm finally getting this down. It's finally happening, you know? So let's see. Step number one. Nice. There we go. Step number one coming faster than ever. Yeah, see, it's working. Oh, there we go. See, we're getting the lentil question out of the way right off the bat, you know? What is my opinion on lentils? I think it's been clarified that, you know, lentils are good. Lentils are good. The Velociraptor, who's becoming a regular, says, just watched the Status Counter-Revolutionary series. Fantastic job. I'm very glad to hear that. Yeah, that one is definitely one of the more popular series on the channel. It's funny, after watching H Bomber Guy's most recent video, which I'm sure a lot of you have watched as well, I was like thinking back to that video, and you know, that was one of my really early videos, and it doesn't have like the direct citations at the bottom of the slides. And I was like, oh God, oh no. Have I done what H Bomber Guy was saying in his video? But I've tried to include the citations in the comment to that video, as well as if you go read the essay form of the Status Counter-Revolutionary, all of the slides are properly cited there. So if anybody wants to go find them that way. Cyber Dandy, hey, what's up? How's streaming going? I mean, so far it's going okay. I've got 19 concurrent viewers. I basically do these live streams on the weeks that I'm not able to do a video on Thursday evening, because it may interest you all to know that I do the entirety of these Friday releases of those Friday videos that I do them all in one evening. I sit down, I record, I edit, I put them all together in a single evening. So if something happens that prevents me from doing that on a Thursday evening, that's why you'll often see me doing these live streams instead, which are themselves, you know, kind of a lot of a commitment, but not quite as much as probably about 7 hours of work for those videos. Which is fine. You know, y'all are paying me essentially to do this as a job. So me having to do that work for that evening is obviously not a huge deal. I really appreciate everyone, by the way, who is a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Anark, ANARK. Also, YouTube has some kind of like membership system. I think that like down there above the channel card, you can see something that's like a join or become a member or something. That's basically like YouTube's version of Patreon. And I get paid out that money along with my measly ad revenue each month, if I can even make the threshold to get money from my ad revenue every month. But it actually helps me get money every month from ad revenue, because you have to get to at least, this is a little bit of a inside look at how being a YouTuber works. You have to make at least $100 before YouTube will pay you out your ad revenue. So for me, that usually happens about every 2 months. But if you become like members on the YouTube thing, it happens more often because I reach that $100 threshold a little more quickly. Anyway, sorry. Sure, nobody gives a single shit about what I just said. So, you know, we got some questions here. I'll just say I've got a pretty bad cough, so if I cough a lot, I apologize. It's probably going to be taking place. Oh, mushroom. Yeah, you like this shirt? Hooah! It's my mushroom shirt. Greetings from Spain. Good to see you here. Somebody asks, which country or countries have the largest anarchist movement in the world? I actually don't know the answer to that. As it may not be shocking that anarchist movements often don't publish their numbers because there's not often going to be membership rules for every single person that considers themselves an anarchist and is active and is engaged in direct action. I think the biggest existing organizations I can think of are probably still those in Spain. I think the C&T FAI, I know that they're having all kinds of disputes right now, but I think those are still pretty large organizations. And FARJ and all of those anarchist organizations in Brazil. Brazil has a ton of anarchist organizations to the degree they're like federating and defederating and all kinds of things. So they have a lot. Those are the ones that first come to mind, but don't take that as a definitive answer. The Dragon Dread. I'm not an anarchist yet, but your videos are interesting. Well, I'm glad you enjoy them. I would say the video series that I think is probably going to be most convincing that anarchism is the correct political theory for understanding how power works in the real world is A Modern Anarchism. So I'm still working on the fourth part of that series, but you can go see parts 1, 2, and 3 right now. However, I will say that, that series is kind of crunchy. That is to say, it's kind of detailed, it's dense, right? So it may not be the best place to start for everyone. However, I would say that if you kind of have any handling of political theory, my video Power is probably going to be a pretty good place to start. And after you've watched Power, I think you'll be pretty prepared to watch A Modern Anarchism. But that's, of course, assuming that you are not an authoritarian leftist, in which case you may be better off watching The State is Counter-Revolutionary first, and then watching Power, and then A Modern Anarchism. Something mentions Greece has a pretty big anarchist scene. Yes, that's a very good point, actually. I can't believe I left out Greece. Greece not only has a huge social anarchist scene, it has a huge individualist anarchist scene. It's been like that for some time as well. They even have an entire area of Greece called Exarchaea, which is an autonomous zone, which has been anarchist controlled for a long time at this point. I can't pronounce this name, but it's like Lel Dornix says, are you familiar with Workers' Participation in the Soviet Union by Mick Costello? It's a short ML text that might be worth making a video response to. Hakeem has mentioned it occasionally. No, I have not. I'm, of course, willing to read something like that. However, you know what the real sad part is about like doing video essays like I do and them being very kind of, I guess, academic, is that I don't really get to choose what I read anymore. Or rather, it's like I get to choose what I read, but only within a certain bound. It's like I choose the topic of the next video the next video essay that I'm going to be doing, not one of the Anarch Abridged, but one of the big video essays. And then pretty much everything that I read while I'm working on that video essay pertains to the topic of that video essay. So like right now, for example, I'm reading only things that pertain to the topic of organization and systems theory and stuff like that for part 4 of A Modern Anarchism, which is on the topic of organization. So, that's kind of the sad part. I would say the text you've recommended there is probably, very interesting, but I probably would have been reading that during the time I was researching for The State is Counter-Revolutionary, which may have been very pertinent at that point. But at this point, it's unlikely that I will return to reading texts on that topic. Somebody asks, Robson Barstow asks, why is nationalism a culture the reason you think you'll be an anarchist for the rest of your life? Heard you say something along those lines the other day. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not saying it'll have that effect on everyone, but for me, there was something about the combination of Rudolf Rocker's historical, sweeping historical narrative, his analysis of many different examples within history, his beautiful prose, and the fact that Nationalism and Culture is not only a history text and a theory text about nationalism and the concepts of culture, but it's also turns out to be this like very deep text about power, how power works. So you may notice that Nationalism and Culture gets quoted quite a bit in my video Power. And that's because some of the most profound quotes I ever found about how power really functions were by Rudolf Rocker, and some of them are in Nationalism and Culture. I consider it his magnum opus. It is beautiful and tragic and detailed and very scholarly. It for me really made me arrive at synthesis for the first time, where I feel like after I read Nationalism and Culture, I finally had like this foundation, this solid political theoretic foundation that I could apply in different places. So I highly recommend it, but it won't necessarily have that same effect for everyone. You know, somebody might come upon Nationalism and Culture and have already established that kind of foundation, in which case it may not have that effect. But if you have not found that foundation yet, it might provide it to you. Our Brain Hurts a Lot says, I've become disillusioned to what has happened to the EZLN recently, and I can't longer see how liberatory movements can fight organized crime. Well, it sounds like you probably didn't hear about the follow-up. The EZLN has only expanded. They essentially just multiplied by 100-fold. So the EZLN has been planning this move for about 3 years. Online, everybody loves to jump to conclusions and didn't do any research and didn't read the letter, the communique that the EZLN released. But the EZLN in the communique was like, wait, and we'll tell you how we're restructuring. And for some reason, everybody took this first communique as being like, well, that's it. The EZLN just broke apart and fell apart. No, that's not what happened. Literally, the communique after next, they're like, all we did was restructure. In fact, the communique between the one they released, where everybody misread it and thought they said they were dissolving, and the one where they just talked about how they had restructured, was a communique which was just calling out like authoritarians and vanguardists for trying to cynically use the release of the previous communique to make it out like they had been destroyed. The EZLN has not been destroyed. They haven't lost territory. In fact, they maintain all of the same territory that they had claimed, except now there are more councils, and now there's more bottom-up control. So, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be disillusioned. The EZLN essentially just expanded. They just expanded their power. Yeah, like numerous people are saying here, like, yeah, I had an ML friend tell me, didn't you hear the Zapatistas are done? Yeah, like they're like just spreading that lie. Like somebody's tried to spread that lie in my comments. In fact, the thing I've realized about authoritarian leftists at this point is they're sophists who just spread lies and misrepresentations in their echo chambers. So they like to talk about how they read and how they're very like astute in the academic, but that's not true. They basically just hand around a bunch of talking points which they all regurgitate mindlessly. It's a bunch of thought-terminating cliches. They don't do any research on their own. They don't actually try to learn about how things work. They memorize a party line, and then they all say the same party line like drones. So right now, a bunch of them who don't realize how foolish they look are trying to spread the lie that the Zapatistas dissolved because for like 3 days or something, we didn't know what the new state of the Zapatista autonomy was going to look like. And during that period of time, authoritarian leftists tried to gloat over the fact that the Zapatistas had lost to the cartels in the state. And during that 3 days, they created these new brainless talking points about how the Zapatistas had dissolved, and that had not taken place at all, in fact. And because they don't do any research on their own, now they're going around spreading this lie that the Zapatistas no longer exist, when the Zapatistas are actually stronger than they were beforehand. Andean, I can't even pronounce that name, but somebody says, "Hi, Comrade Broski, UK here. Where do you stand on Enrico Malatesta's idea of anarcho-communism? Tankies in denial or else?" No, the majority of anarchists are communists. So not sure what you're getting at there. Enrico Malatesta is very at home in the anarchist tradition. In fact, you'll even find that the majority of individualist anarchists up until the Soviet Union and afterwards, even they identified as communists. I mean, you'll even find that the most extreme anarchists like Novatore still identified as communists. So anarcho-communism is commonplace. I would say that's the majority trend in anarchism. And Malatesta is one of the most notable theorists for anarchists. Lones Thrax says, "What would you say to council communists like me?" I would say that you're like allies in waiting. One of the things that frustrates me is that I read, for example, Anton Pannekoek. I don't know if I'm saying his name properly, but I've actually read a few of his texts, and I actually like most of his analysis. I agree with the majority of his analysis. And the thing is that the majority of his analysis and the majority of the council communist analysis that I've seen and its recommendations about what to do really just sound like anarcho-syndicalism. They sound like pretty much exactly what the anarcho-syndicalists advocate and what they did in practice. I mean, there are minor differences, but they are very minor. There's even a period of time for about a month where all I did was try to do comparative analysis between anarcho-syndicalist texts and council communist texts, and the differences are very minor, very, very minor, to the degree where afterwards, I kind of found myself frustrated that council communists so often associate themselves with authoritarian leftists like Leninists when they really have almost nothing in common with authoritarian leftists from what I was reading of council communist literature. In fact, they basically sound like they are anarcho-syndicalists. And if they read anarchism and they read anarcho-syndicalism, they would discover that, in fact, their allies were not with the Leninists, but were with the anarchists all along. So what I would say is I consider council communism to be a horizontalist tendency. I consider it to be a libertarian socialist tendency. And I wish that more council communists would recognize that and stop trying to shit on anarchists and stop siding with authoritarian leftists and recognize that their true allies are the anarchists. So come join us. Council communists are against syndicates as a means of class struggle. The word syndicate and the word council, those are both very broad words. Those both can be utilized in a variety of senses. Anarcho-syndicalism is basically just a method for building worker power from the bottom up by creating councils, essentially, at the level of workplaces, and then federating them together in both industrial and trade unions, and then making bigger and bigger federations wherein workers come together within those councils to make decisions and to delegate people. So it's like, it's very flexible and very open. So like saying that they're against syndicates, I mean, or I guess you might be saying that they're against trade unions or industrial unions, but in my experience, that's not the case. They're not against trade unions or industrial unions. So yeah, I don't know. Absolutely Citron says, how can communities create systems of public transit under anarchism? How can it work? Well, I think the key to understanding this is just understanding that under anarchism, councils federate into bigger and bigger federations. So they would just make the decisions among a variety of different councils, all of which who would be linked together by the public transit that's being proposed. They would all just come together. They would vote about the utilization of shared assets, and if it passed, they would just build the public transit. The Dragon Dread says, is there any video in your channel where you talk about the forms of libertarian socialism that aren't anarchist but just skeptical of the state? No, but that's an interesting topic, I suppose. I'm mostly best read on anarchism, so I don't know if I would necessarily want to make a video on that, as I don't ever want to speak outside of my expertise, but I probably could make a video that would be 20 to 30 minutes on that topic pretty easy. What's your opinion on Trotsky statism? I mean, I'm against statism of all kinds. Trotsky's a weird figure because, you know, when you're criticizing Trotsky, you always have to be clear. You're criticizing early, middle, or late Trotsky, which really differed quite a bit. Middle Trotsky is garbage, the absolute worst. Early Trotsky has some good stuff. Late Trotsky was, I don't know, kind of seemed like he regretted a lot that he had done in that middle era, but I won't go in too far on that. Not a huge fan of Trotsky, but at least early Trotsky had some things that were kind of worthwhile contributions. Cyber Dandy, I agree with you. I don't think they're against syndicates. What they want is a body outside the syndicate for decision making. And honestly, most anarcho-syndicalists do as well. In fact, if you look at the C&T FAI, that's exactly what the C&T FAI is, right? C&T FAI was a non-economic body, an organization outside of the unions themselves, which of course had unions incorporated under that body that made decisions that affected all of those unions. And delegates that went to the C&T FAI made economic decisions, but they also just made all kinds of different decisions. So, yeah, I mean, there were just civil council bodies that were created within the Spanish Civil War. So, Queeradelic says, hey, Anark, Steph here. I really enjoyed A Modern Anarchism Part 2. Your take on Stirner's work and the summary of individualist anarchism or anarchy were great. Sorry, a lot of us are edgy online. It's not all of us. I think I've seen you comment something like that before. Yeah, no, I put a lot of effort into actually really understanding individualist anarchism and egoism in specific. So it's sometimes very frustrating when I get into debates or just, you know, discussions with individualist anarchists where they pretend that I, you know, just have no idea what I'm talking about. And it's like, I've literally read your works. Like, you know, I know what they say. I've like analyzed them and taken them apart and utilized pieces of the theory that I found within them within my own theory. So, I appreciate you saying that. I find that I think that there is kind of this tribalism that really prevents a lot of individualist anarchists from hearing the worthwhile critiques that social anarchists have, and vice versa. A lot of social anarchists can be prevented from understanding the critiques of social anarchism that individualist anarchists have. Lonus Thrak says, when the Communist Party of Germany was formed in 1918, a majority in the party were opposed to electoral politics and trade unionism. I mean, that's fine. There have been lots of principled critiques to trade unionism by anarchists as well. Once again, anarcho-syndicalism is not just trade unionism. And if you look at the examples of anarcho-syndicalism in practice, I really recommend reading about the C&T FAI. It is not just trade unionism. As for electoral politics, I don't really know how that's relevant. Anarchists don't engage in electoral politics. They are the most vocal anti-electoral politics contingent you'll find on the left. Headless to y'all says, what do you think of some libertarian socialists saying a state couple work? I don't know what that's saying. It's saying a state couple work with libsocs values. I've heard channels like What is Politics advocate the idea sometimes. Well, I'm not entirely sure what your comment was saying there, but I don't think What is Politics supports states. So I must be a misunderstanding. Helmholtz, here in Argentina, a self-proclaimed anarcho-capitalist is about to become president. Misery and social conflict is going to sharply increase. Any advice or material to read to help radicalize people? I would watch my videos that's essentially just a reading list. You know, I have an anarchist reading list, so I would probably just kind of pick and choose out of those. You know, there's a bunch of books, but there's also some essays in there. You know, if you also want to distribute some of my work, it might be a good place to go because, you know, a lot of this work or some of this work is meant to educate people and find where they're at. I think like Constructing the Revolution in essay form it makes a pretty good pamphlet. You go to an anarchist library, there's a pamphlet form of it. Power might be a good one. But yeah, it's disturbing that anarcho-capitalism has, you know, anarcho-capitalists to have a head of state. It's very weird. But also it's very important to provide a principled critique against capitalism there. Oh, okay, people made the comment. It should be could. Let me go back to that comment and try to understand it. Oh, I've lost the comment. Oh, they clarified. Sorry, I meant they could work. I've seen some libertarian socialists advocate a worker state. Yeah, well, here's the thing. In the conversation about worker states, we're often working with the definition that Marxists use. And the Marxist definition of a state is highly nebulous. It means very little. It's literally when one class imposes its will over another. So when the proletarian all come together and they establish organizational bodies for defense, that's a worker state by the conception of Marxists. And in that occasion, every anarchist supports a worker state. I mean, some individualist anarchists, or rather I should say anti-organizationalist anarchists, perhaps do not by that definition, but nearly all anarchists then support a worker state. So it becomes kind of meaningless. Many anarchists have pointed out that what anarchists are supporting by the Marxist conception is a real dictatorship of the proletariat, an actual bottom-up control by the working class. And their criticism then, therefore, in the Marxist lens, becomes that these authoritarian methods have never achieved a dictatorship of the proletariat, but instead have achieved a dictatorship of the state bureaucracy, who have themselves become a sort of new burgeoning capitalist class. That all it ever establishes is a new national bourgeois, and the national bourgeois now becomes the actual controlling class. And yeah, so that's kind of what's going on with that. Jake Vaughn says, I found your channel yesterday and I'm hooked. So happy to catch a stream. Well, I'm glad to have you here, Jake. There is a lot of material for you to look through. You know, I've got those short pieces, the Anark Abridge and the Anark Responds videos, but the stuff that I'm most proud of on this channel are my video essays. You know, a lot of you that are here, I recognize that I've gained thousands of new subscribers since I transitioned to doing the Anark Abridged, Anark Responds videos every week. And I just want to note that, once again, the work I'm most proud of, the work that I put the most effort into, I put months and months and months into, are the video essays. If you go look, there's just a section of my channel that are the video essays. Those video essays take me months. You know, a modern anarchism, each part of a modern anarchism have taken me between 8 to 10 months on every single part. That means that by the time I'm done with part 4, I will have spent almost 4 years on these video essays for the series A Modern Anarchism, which might sound astonishing, but I hope when you watch them, you'll see the amount of effort that has gone into them. So I'm glad that y'all enjoy these Anark Abridged and Anark Responds videos, but I would encourage you to go watch the video essays. So let's see. Jerubot says, "Hey, Anark, hope you're doing well. How are things going with Cooperation Tulsa? Any updates after getting the container?" Yeah, no, getting for anybody who doesn't know, I'm part of a group here in Tulsa called Cooperation Tulsa. We have the 2.5 acres of land that we're currently cultivating. And we essentially just raise the money to get a shipping container out on site in order to store our things. And yeah, we have begun transferring a bunch of materials out to the shipping container. It has been immediately very, very helpful to get that shipping container established. We are essentially now organizing all the tools we've got. We've got a lot of lumber tools out there. And so the last few work days have been us, organizing mostly. And it's coming up on winter now, so we can't really do much cultivation of the soil. But when it comes around to the next planting season, we do plan on actually tilling the ground and start trying to plant things. Jerubot says, also, everyone should go buy the hard copies of Modern Anarchism. They're really nice. Yeah, ta-da! Look. Okay, have I got this on camera right? Oh, no, there we go. Boom. See, the seditionist media has been publishing each of the parts in separate little books. They're pretty thin, as you can see. They're like little, almost like pamphlets. Here's part 1, and part 2 is currently in production. It's going to have a cover like this, but it's going to be different colors. And then we're going to do parts 3 and 4 as the time comes. And yeah, go over to Seditionist Media and buy a copy. Let me go grab a link to that. I'm going to make it easy for everybody. Okay, here we go. Here's part 2. They're currently doing pre-orders for part 2. And here's the link. The link is in chat. So if y'all want to help pre-order, get pre-orders up for part 2 of A Modern Anarchism, that would be fantastic. That's always good, and really help distribute the book. So yeah, buy part 1, part 2, and then eventually part 3 will be in the works. And once I finish part 4 and release, then we will then begin working on part 4 as well. Lonus Thrax. I started out as a Hoxaist. I don't actually know how to say that. Then realized USSR was degenerated from Stalin onwards. Then I became a Trotskyist. Then I realized Leninist organization creates hierarchy and bureaucracy. And nowadays I'm a council communist. Listen, don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, but that is one of the most common stories for people who become anarchists who were authoritarian leftists. That's an extremely, not necessarily that first part about being a Hoxaist first, but people who are authoritarian leftists often go through that exact series of realizations that you're coming to right now. And I think if you keep reading history and you keep reading theory, you're just going to realize that hierarchical power is always going to lead to degeneration, and that we need to develop horizontal methods to get things done. So if you end at council communism, just recognize you're probably an ally to anarchists, but many council communists become anarcho-syndicalists through this exact series of realizations that you're saying right now. Ryan, the phrase ANCAP head of state really does a great job of succinctly demonstrating the incoherence of the ideology. We'll definitely be buying the Modern Anarchism copies. Yeah, no, I agree. It's bizarre, right? Very, very odd. Lonus Thraxon says, what is the anarchist position on historical materialism and dialectical materialism? Marxists almost made them into dogma. the anarchist position is complicated, right? So first of all, you'd have to interpret what you even necessarily meant by historical materialism and dialectical materialism. These often become like buzzwords, which really just stand in for I'm right and you're wrong, and they don't really have any, strong theoretical backing to what they mean. But if what is meant by historical materialism is that the history of the procession of history is done by class struggle, then most anarchists would agree. However, anarchists would add to that it is actually the struggle of power structures. So the different needs, desires between different groups of people and the power structures that they create, and the vying of those different power structures for some place of supremacy or domination in terms of hierarchy. So anarchists often have something that's very similar to a historical materialism, but a lot of the time what people mean by historical materialism is just economic reductionism. They mean that the procession of all of history is just the procession of the development of the means of production, in which case I think that's highly simplistic and false. It actually just isn't borne out by history. But it's the hard part is that there is some strong element of truth to it, that the development of the means of production and economic relations, of course, does to some significant degree determine the procession of historical development. It's just not the sole factor determining historical development. Anarchists wish to understand how power function and how relations of power determine the actual development of different societies. So now, insofar as what you mean by dialectical materialism, that one is so much more buzzword. Most people have no idea what they even mean by dialectical materialism. Once again, materialism by many Marxists just boils down to economic reductionism. So, much of the time what they mean by dialectical materialism is, I'm an economic reductionist. And many of them, what they mean by dialectical materialism is that everything is sort of developing in the time through this base superstructure relation, that the base and the superstructure, the economic base, and these sort of, arbitrary elements of class domination in the superstructure are in this reciprocal relation where they develop with one another. I think the anarchist seeks to complicate that. The base and superstructure is way too simplistic of a concept. There is not like some group of elements called the base and some group of elements called the superstructure, which you could look at and understand in isolation. They are in fact fully intertwined into one massive developed power structure. And the elements of the superstructure and the elements of the base are constantly mutually reinforcing, such that they can't be understood as separate things. So this is something I lay out in A Modern Anarchism through what I call the mega machine. It's essentially one big, intertwined, functioning machine for hierarchy. And therefore, I really reject this base superstructure notion. I consider it very, very simplistic. If all you mean by dialectical materialism, however, is what Marx and Engels actually meant, and that is, they were just against Hegel's idealist dialectic. So back in the days they were in, there was this sort of a dispute between idealism, the idea that ideas precede or constitute reality, and materialism, that reality was a material construct and that everything rooted from materiality or materialism or whatever. And what Marx and Engels were doing with the dialectical materialism in this sense is they were saying material reality is the determining factor, not ideals or ideas. So they were rejecting the Hegelian dialectic. They were turning Hegel on his head, is what they were saying. Hegel believed that ideas determined the procession of material reality, whereas what they were saying was, no, everything lies in material reality. Ideas are a subset of material reality. And ideas are mutually reinforced by the material conditions themselves. So if that's all you mean, then like almost every anarchist is a dialectical materialist in this sense. It's almost become trivial because this dispute between materialism and idealism is dead. An anachronism. It's like something that died. It's a debate that died in like the late 1800s, unless you're in a philosophy department. Like nobody actually believes that ideas transcend and precede reality, and we're like all acting out some transcendent set of ideas. That's nobody believes that anymore. German idealism is very dead, right? So the use of this phrase dialectical materialism has lost a lot of its purpose. Really all that's left of it is this emphasis on the dialectic, which is this constantly, this idea that there's a constant reciprocal relation between things. There's this it's a process ontology. It believes that things are constituted as they are situated through process, right? And once again, most anarchists would just agree with that. In fact, you'll even find libertarian socialists and anarchists like Murray Bookchin who just explicitly say that they hold a dialectic. So like, I guess that's why I was saying the answer to your question is complicated. There's just a lot to be said about it, right? Like there's just a lot to be said. Also, I realize I have top chat on. I'll go fix that. Panos Roussis says, hey, Anark, on a live stream done some weeks prior, you mentioned the further decentralization of the Zapatistas, but I also saw that Mares is now dissolved. Can you explain why this happened? Mares is just the name of a certain kind of council in the Zapatista societies. It used to be that, in fact, the Mares had more administrative control over things. And what they just did, by their own admission, is they flipped the pyramid upside down. This is their own phrasing, where they say they cut it from the tip, is what they say. So they actually did not dissolve their power structures. They just restructured. That's all that happened. If you want to go learn more about that, you can read their most recent communiques. So let's see here. Oh yeah, I have top chat on. Lonus Thrax. Could not agree more on your opinion on dialectical materialism. When I was in a trot group, I subscribed to, oh, you were in the IMT, huh? I used to brag that they had the mastery of Diamet while other trot groups did not. Wow, that is the most Trotskyist thing I've ever heard. Trotskyist groups all shitting on other Trotskyist groups and splintering 1,000 times. Almost a parody. Okay, I need to turn on live chat. Here we go. Also, I'll just point out, if anybody wants to help, there's super chats. You can donate to the stream. I guess I should also pitch that just in case anybody has got money to spare. I suppose that might be the case. If that's the case, feel free to donate through the super chats there. That's always super helpful. That's another thing, just goes into the slush that ends up getting given to me with my ad revenue. So that'd be nice. If you don't want to use that, you use Cash App, or as I've said numerous times, if you want to go become a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Anark, ANARK, then please do. That'd be fantastic. Let's see here. So Velociraptor says, serious question, if Israel's an apartheid state, then why didn't it get boycotted at the same time as the real apartheid in South Africa? Just confuses me a bit, because not every bad thing is going to get dealt with all at the same time. That's just how it works, you know. It's like South Africa was just something that everybody was focusing on for that period of time, and South Africa was apartheid, and so is the state of Israel. the state of Israel, however, just had so much Western support, and there's so much propaganda around support for the state of Israel. That is to say, there's so much Zionism outside of Israel itself that has only been recently, as we have seen the brutality of the massacre that's taking place in Gaza and the extended use of this concentration camp in the West Bank and in Gaza, that people are now beginning to recognize that it has been an apartheid state for an extended period of time at this point. It's basically just that the veil of Zionist propaganda is finally falling apart. It's been a long time. It's been very effective. Thank you, Alexander Gonzalez. It looks like they just gifted 5 Anark memberships, which that is so fantastic. Thank you so much for that. I don't actually know how that works. Do I like give these out now, or do people claim them? I have no idea. It works somehow. Let's see here. Next, Queer Delic gave 5 euros. I've learned a lot from your channel. Cheers from the UK. Queers from the UK. Is your surname the real one or a pseudonym based on your physics background? I don't ever answer that question for obvious reasons, right? I'll let you decide. But, I mean, I'll just say, look up the name Baryon, see if you find a family name Baryon. You can kind of infer from there. See if anybody has the last name Baryon. Sam Malik says, can you answer my question about Myanmar? He just gave $5. Thank you very much, Sam. He says, have you caught up on the civil war against the CCP-backed junta? If so, what are your thoughts on the militias? No, I haven't looked into it further. I know you sent me some stuff about it recently. However, I definitely plan to read into it a little bit before I do the next video, which the video I'd intended on doing yesterday, but I was just really not feeling up to it, and I had so much stuff on my plate. Was a video about decentralized defense. How do you organize militias, federate them together? How does that work, and so on. So I will be reading into that in order to, I'll probably make at least a brief comment, in the next video. Yeah, I should just say I have so many projects in the work right now. I have way too much on my plate. I've hugely overloaded myself at the moment. I will say, however, soon you'll be seeing me doing some collaborations with others. There will be some collaborations coming out, and I look forward to those being released. I just really need to get to work trying to get those done. I also am trying to finish the script to part 4 before the end of the year. So I have so much work to be doing right now. And of course, I still have a normal job that I have to keep doing. So... got another $5 this time from Clownarchist. Good to see you here. He asks, can you please discuss the dangers of narcissism and how it can dismantle our anarchist organizations if not dealt with effectively? I mean, narcissistic tendencies, the desire to self-aggrandize, self-center, make everything about oneself is hugely dangerous and can lead to concentrations of power. If somebody has these narcissistic desires, these desires to self-center and for everything to be about them, they absolutely need to go to therapy. They need to accept that this is a problem. This is not a strength. This is not a good thing for them. They need to seek therapy. It will probably destroy almost everything in their life if they do not. It should be said, however, people who do not actually have the disorder, who do not have a narcissistic personality disorder, can still act in ways that are very narcissistic, which are very self-centering, which are very self-aggrandizing, which try to turn projects into vanity projects. And it cannot be stated how much that in horizontal organizations, you are not the star of the show. There may be faces for organizations, right? For example, I'm the face of Cooperation Tulsa a lot of the time, but I'm not the leader of Cooperation Tulsa. I don't make decisions for the group. And, sometimes I'm not even there and the group's making decisions. It's really important that these tendencies of self-centering not be allowed to control the organization. And it should be said that a lot of people are doing it in ways which are very, very subtle and subversive and damaging to organizations, where they constantly are trying to make everything about them. Everything is about how it harms them. Everything is about their worries and anxieties. Organizations should, of course, be sensitive to that, but no one person, everything is not about one person. So, yeah. Also, I'm trying to figure out here, somebody gifted 5 memberships, but do I distribute those? I don't know. How does that work? Does it just get claimed by people? I guess I'll have to look into it afterwards, but yeah, I sadly, I've seen so many organizations. Oh, they were already distributed. Awesome. Thank you, Sam. I wasn't sure about that. Mr. Medina says, have you ever seen cults of personality or uncritical reverence in anarchist groups similar to the tankies of authoritarian socialist groups? I haven't, but I'm curious. Not exactly the same, because in anarchist groups, people aren't ever given that explicit structural power. But there are, of course, theoretic cults. And that's to say, there are anarchists who are just so diehard about one or another theorist that everything is about that theorist. And this is, of course, not to criticize anarchist groups that name themselves after some theorist. This is to say that there are some anarchist groups who just take the word of their theorist as being true. I've seen individualist anarchist groups, for example, that just kind of see Novatore and Bonanno as just being these Christ-like figures that they just follow to a T, and they just follow their words, without any conception of critique. But yeah, that it can every once in a while it can be a problem when people commit themselves too much to one theorist as a figure, and that can lead to issues. And of course, we've all seen this with the sort of hilarious, with people who are big into Stirner somehow making Stirner and his identity and his visage their primary personality trait, right? Like they put egoist on their profile and they have Stirner all over everything, and they're memeing Stirner memes all the time. I can't think of anything more contradictory to Stirner's work than that. That's sort of hilarious to me. So, but yeah, it's like, yeah, it's like Queerdella says, could making Stirner your identity be any more contrary to what he said? It couldn't be any more contradictory. It's like literally the opposite of what Stirner would want. Andrewism is one of those collaborations. I did some voiceover for Andrewism, and I assume that'll be in a video coming up soon. And this Monday, I will be going on Andrewism's stream at 3 p.m. Central Standard Time. And so if you want to catch me over there, I'll be in a Q&A with a round table of other anarchists talking with Andrewism. If you're not subscribed to Andrewism's channel, you should be. He's fantastic. He's one of the best YouTubers that I've seen. That being said, me and Andrewism have wanted to do a more substantive collaboration for quite some time, and we've been talking about a few different ones. So you might see that there's more after this. Anarchy, he says, the cult of personality from anarchists often just comes from anarchist online personalities. No doubt about that. No doubt about that. I mean, I'll say that, people have treated me as this sort of like reverent figure from time to time. But I'm happy to say that the people who are fans of my work are often just appreciative of that I've offered a synthesis, and they take that synthesis in hand and they bring it out into the world. I just want to say that even if you ended up like hating me, or you ended up disagreeing with me, or you ended up, really not like objecting to things about that happen in my life, I would still hope that the work that I've produced, the theoretical base that I've produced, can still be helpful to you. That you can still take those theoretical concepts that I've synthesized together and take them out into the world and apply them, regardless of how you feel about me. So don't take, my work and me are connected in the sense that I created it, but your opinion of me should not dictate how you judge that work. I hope that you can look at that work and understand it as a body of theory in and of itself. Tempest Lord Raihan says, what would you say would be an anarchist solution to the suburbs and how they're built? I think they should be broken up into small towns and use some of the houses to make museums, restaurants, etc. That's, of course, going to be a really difficult question to answer. I don't think that you're ever going to perfectly eliminate the structure of suburbs and rural areas. But what we would hope to do in the meantime is understand that the suburbs and rural areas and the urban areas, they exist as they are now. Okay, we can imagine how we might reform them, but we need to deal with the way they are now. So what we need to be doing is looking to these suburban areas and understanding a lot of these places, they own their property, or rather they at least have a mortgage on it. And that means that they can cultivate gardens in their backyards. That means that they can store items and things that are needed for our organizations. If we make inroads into those places, that property can be helpful to our organizations. The way I look at it is, if it would be super helpful, for example, if we were to create big networks of backyard gardens and then distribute the things that are being grown in those backyard gardens, help them build them, and then, distribute the goods among those people who are in the network of backyard gardens, and also distribute them to people in need. That was something that we've actually been talking a lot about here in Tulsa. And we actually have a group that's kind of making at least a little bit of headway on that, called Yardtopia, where they're trying to go around to people that live in the suburbs and at least kind of, ostensibly own their property, and trying to help them build the gardens above ground garden beds, and to begin planting things so that they can begin growing. And then I think in the long term, the hope is that it will create a distribution network as well. Insofar as off in the future, how would they be reformed? Yeah, I mean, if you want to get rid of the suburbs, you just literally have to bulldoze a huge amount of the suburbs. There's no way you're going to take those houses and, they're just going to be houses. You could get rid of the fences and turn them into, circular communes, for example. You could make it to where they kind of all share a common land, and they can all go out into a common area where all their yards meet back to back to back. That's something that can and is being done in certain cities like Portland. But yeah. So I guess Psychedelic just said, in the suburbs, bringing down the fences between the backyard gardens is a way to make a community. Yeah, that's actually being done right now in some places. Velociraptor says, I personally adhere to certain reactionary ideals, like having a body count is bad, religion is good, the classic family unit. How would I be able to open on these clearly more nuanced topics? Well, I mean, first you would have to justify yourself, having a body count is bad. Why? Are you against sexual freedom? Do you think it's bad that people enjoy their life and their sexuality? It's how does that affect you? Why are you concerned about that? Do you believe in human autonomy? I'll just say, in my experience, people having a high body count, quote unquote, having been with many partners, has nothing to do with whether they make a good romantic partner. But of course, I'm polyamorous, so I really don't care. That doesn't affect me at all. It seems to me, and this is not to insult you, people who are concerned about their partners having high body counts are insecure about their partners having experienced more of the world. And what they're hoping to do is have partners who are more virginal so that their partners can't compare them to other lovers. That's my perspective. As for the second thing you said, religion good. I mean, personally, I disagree. I think that, you know, there are certain religions which are kind of neutral. I would say that they might have even some ecological value. For example, native religions, some certain forms of paganism. But I think that in a general sense, religion has been a tool for expanding warfare and conflict. It is a way to create mass obedience by using false concepts in order to brainwash the population. I think the only upside is that it does establish some commonality of culture, but even that is not necessarily the case. I mean, you can even see that, you know, Catholics and Protestants in Great Britain were literally murdering each other in the streets and undergoing coups to overthrow and subjugate one another. Religion tends to create more fissures than anything else. So that's my perspective. I won't go too far in on that. And then the third one is the classic family unit. You know, that's what, if it works, it works, you know, whatever is good for the people that are engaging. If people want to be in the classical family unit, let them. I will say that in a general sense, it's better for there to be more than one parent in the household, mostly just because it's a lot of work to raise a child, right? But it doesn't need to be a man and a woman and two children. That's not normal throughout history. If you look at the way humans lived in nature, they did not live in this modern concept of a family unit. That's not normal. What happened in nature when we lived, you know, in tribal structures or village structures is that the village raised children, and that the extended family was actually far more important. You know, your extended family, both sides of the family and who you're related to, as well as just the whole village. This concept of exclusive monogamy and only two parents and two children in a single household is extremely recent. And honestly, I really don't think that it's very useful. I think that it is the outcome of a highly atomized society where capitalism wants us broken off in the smallest possible units so that it can control us and isolate us. I mean, even in recent history, before the nuclear family, you know, there was the mixed family was far more common. You know, people being kids being integrated with the family on both sides of their parents and being raised by those people. That was much more common. This idea of the you know, nuclear family units, extremely recent and very fragile, might I add. So yeah, we could go in longer on each of those, but those are kind of my brief conceptions of what's going on there. Matt Foose says, what is the general responsibility of anarchists when dealing with authoritarian leftists, liberals, further right political agendas? Is debating them largely unproductive? I have a really nuanced opinion on this. I would say probably most of the time it's going to be a waste of time. It's going to devolve into blood sports if you go debate them. If you can go on their streams and just tear them apart and just absolutely demolish them, yeah, there's probably some value in that. But should anarchists be spending their time trying to go on right-wing streams to demolish them? No, probably not. In fact, I would say that anyone who does is probably going to be taken in by the perverse incentives of that kind of system. And what we've seen is that a lot of the time what takes place is they keep watering down their points because they're always concerned with how they're going to convey themselves to right-wingers. Instead of being correct and being right, I should say, developing a theoretic structure and understanding of the world, which accords to the world, which is often going to be very radical and is going to make right-wingers bristle. Instead, what they start doing is they start watering down what they say because they know they don't want to repulse right-wingers. They don't want to turn right-wingers away unnecessarily. So I would say there's, of course, some tempering of your rhetoric that you should do where if this rhetoric could appeal to a large number of people, try to make it appeal to a large number of people. But I think that becoming a debate bro or going on debates and doing debates with right-wingers all the time is going to tend to make you water down your rhetoric to appeal to them. Carpet Pack says, speaking from experience as someone with a lot of CPTSD, much of the concern over another person's sexual activity comes from fear of abandonment. Yes, absolutely agreed. In fact, this is discussed so much in polyamory communities. So much of people's feelings, desires for monogamy, desires for partners to not have had other sexual experiences or not continue to have sexual experiences is based in this feeling that if they do, they're going to realize that you're not that great, or that they're gonna leave you because you don't meet their needs. But that's a problem with monogamy, right? In polyamory, that doesn't mean they have to leave you. If they find someone that pleases them in a certain way, they can be with that person for the period of time that they continue to get that pleasure from that person, and they can still be with you in that process. Whereas with monogamy, if that happens, maybe they're going to cheat on you, and then they're going to leave you and you're going to break up. So, yes. This topic is so big and complicated that, there's entire spheres of polyamory, influencers and educators that talk about this stuff. But we got a live chat again from Anarcho Clownarchist for $10. I appreciate you so much, by the way. They say, had someone in the last education group who misinterpreted Stirner to justify narcissism, trying to push polyamory on his girlfriend using the anarchist collective we were trying to make as to why. Oh, I see. Yeah, that's not good. One thing I will say is that I think that it is easy to read Stirner and come to those sort of narcissistic, self-centering conclusions if you don't read Stirner thoroughly. Because Stirner is constantly talking about the self and self-interest, but the thing that confounds that understanding of Stirner is that Stirner doesn't consider the self to just be your body. Stirner considers the self to expand into those that you love, those that are in your life, and those things that you value. So your friends, your family, people that are in those organizations that you're in, those people all are part of the self in Stirner's conception, because he has this idea of what he calls ownness. Your ownness is sort of the expansiveness of the self. So it's actually very Buddhist in that sense, insofar as that you sort of annihilate the separation between the self and other. And this is why Stirner's egoism is actually not narcissistic in that sense. It is not self-aggrandizing, self-centering, or if it is, it's because the self expands beyond the ego, right? So, yeah, no, that's pushing polyamory is wrong. You should not, or I should say, trying to force your partner to be polyamorous when they're uncomfortable with it, insofar as that they are not consenting and desire to try that, that's wrong. I would consider that a form of abuse. However, if that doesn't mean that it may not be okay if you and your partner want to open up and try that. If your partner is consenting to trying that new thing, then that's not wrong. But pushing it on your partner when your partner is expressing to you that they are uncomfortable, that they don't want to do it, yeah, that is kind of a form of grooming or abuse. So yeah, that's no good. I'm sorry you went through that situation. Yeah, Mr. Medina points out the watered down ideas of certain leftist debaters can be a good stepping stone in radicalizing others. I used to be a liberal, and online debaters helped radicalize me to an anarchist. Yeah, I'm not saying it has no value. There's a lot of anarchists and far leftists who just reject all value of that. I don't. I would think that would be kind of silly. There are definitely people who have been radicalized by that precisely as you say. So I'm definitely not ruling out that possibility. I'm just saying that it is going to tend to turn that debater into a sort of more and more watered down form of what they once were. It might de-radicalize the debater themselves. XX asks, where do you go to learn more about polyamory? So let me look here. There's a few different channels that I follow that I'm just going to recommend you. Okay. So these are on Instagram, or her name is Leanne Yao, Leanne YAU. She's fantastic. She's kind of like a well-known polyamory educator. There's also, let's see here, Decolonizing Love. They're also on Instagram, but they might be elsewhere. Both of those are really great. The Leanne Yao, I think, is one of the best. She's really good. But there's actually a ton. You'd be shocked to find how many there actually are. Sir Verbose says, thoughts on social democracy. I'm new to anarchism and currently identify as a SOCDEM. Seems to provide a high quality of life where it's implemented in Europe. Would like to hear your criticisms. Yeah, well, the thing about social democracy is that is its claim to fame. It does improve the quality of life. There's two problems, however. Problem number one, social democracy is rarely, if ever, achieved by aiming for social democracy. Social democracy is usually achieved by aiming for something revolutionary, far beyond social democracy, to the point to where the system has to give in to these radical demands that end up forming a social democracy. So if you go look at Scandinavia, there was lots of parliamentary entryism taking place, but it was the parliamentary entryism of a revolutionary constituency. So this revolutionary constituency was essentially trying to do a revolution in those countries. And then the parliament had to concede. You had such revolutionary sentiments. They were just voting in the most radical people into their parliament as possible. And when the time came when, of course, they voted, they were going to vote in a very radical way. And so you got social democracy by demanding much more than social democracy. Okay, number one. So you don't get social democracy by demanding social democracy. You get social democracy by demanding something the system can't give you. And then what the system does is it gives you social democracy, hoping that you will stop being a revolutionary. That brings me to point number two. It usually succeeds in doing that. When it gives you those demands, it's like a pressure release valve. Okay. And it tends to make it to where the workers are given so much all at once that as the generations pass, revolutionary sentiments decline. This is another thing you see in Scandinavia. So as the time goes, they gave them all of those concessions, and now the revolutionaries have diminished in society, and there's very few revolutionary organizations that are actually left in places like Sweden, Norway, and Switzerland, for example. And this is because once you give them that higher quality of life, they are less motivated towards revolution. Okay. And that's not to say, of course, that it's bad that they got that quality of life. It's just to say that when you stop at social democracy, that's all you're going to get. And then this kind of leads us to the last point. If that happens, you begin to decline, you slowly backslide. So we also see that in all these Scandinavian countries. All these Scandinavian countries, now there are right-wing parties that are starting to become insurgent because there's no longer the strong revolutionary values. And so what's happening, those right-wing parties now want to cut all those social programs. They want to peel back all of those, public amenities. They're trying to get rid of welfare little by little by little. They're trying to normalize this sort of Reaganite or Thatcherite economics. And that's what happens because you didn't get social democracy by wanting social democracy. You got it by being revolutionaries and them conceding to you. And so now that the revolutionaries are gone, you're going to slowly backslide into what you had before. So this is why I'm not a reformist of any kind, including a social democrat. You are never going to make a social democracy become revolutionary. You have to commit to the fact that no matter what the system gives you, it will never be enough, that the system has to be overthrown and replaced by something different, wherein you, the masses, are in control. And you don't have to be, beholden to hierarchical power structures carrying out your desires, but you are instead yourself as the people in control, so that there will be no backsliding unless the people themselves want backsliding. And I'll just say they probably aren't going to, right? So there you go. That's my opinion. That's very, very abbreviated. Psychedelic says, maybe my pantheism is why I found it so much easier to understand Stirner. Yeah, Stirner is, he's not literally a pantheist, but there's some very pantheistic conceptions going on in Stirner, like this idea of the expansion of the self. Once again, I would say it's most comparative to like a Buddhist conception of self. But yeah. Tempest Lord Ryan says, I'd say that religion is more an ambivalent tool. Being a Christian agnostic myself, I think there's a place for it in an anarchist society, be it that it's more egalitarian, think the Quakers, etc. Yeah, I mean, insofar as you have a religious tendency which is more egalitarian, which is more horizontal in nature, I'm not going to say any negative things about it. But, you know, the opinion I said before is pretty well how I feel about it. But of course, if you are standing beside me in the struggle, if you want the same things as me, if you are an anarchist or libertarian socialist, if you are a horizontalist of any kind, you're my ally. I don't care how you came to those conclusions insofar as we want the same things and we're fighting together. So that's my view on it. We can have philosophical debates in a place where we feel safe. Or if we don't need to have those debates, we can have them after we succeed. How about that? Psychedelic says, it looks like Leanne Yao has a blog called Polyphilia if you don't use Instagram. Yes, that's true. I think Leanne Yao is on pretty much every social media as well. She's a very popular influencer. Rose Red Thorns, yo, what are we talking about today? I don't know. Everything, I guess. Seems like we've kind of focused around polyamory, religion, social democracy, and the Zapatistas quite a bit. Anakihi donates $2. Thank you very much, Anakihi. And they say, it's why revolution can't end. We call it ake, ake, ake. Yeah. Absolutely. Revolution is an orientation, not necessarily a concrete goal. You keep pushing and pushing and pushing forever. There are numerous anarchist quotes that say just as much. Margot Soren says, what's the difference between libertarian socialism and anarchism? I've explained this one numerous times, but I'll go again. I think it can be pretty simple to understand. Libertarian socialism is the big grouping. Okay. Anarchism is a kind of libertarian socialism. So inside of libertarian socialism, you've got anarchism, neo-Zapatismo, autonomous Marxism, council communism, a bunch of different kinds of libertarian socialism. So, when I say somebody is a libertarian socialist, I'm not really saying a whole lot about the specifics of their orientation other than they want a society controlled from the bottom up, which is stateless by the conception that I've discussed. Not necessarily the Marxist conception, but hopefully you know what I'm saying here. Got another donation, $5 from Velociraptor. Thank you for that. First donation by Velociraptor. I appreciate all the openness as I'm autistic and often get too passionate about certain topics, especially politics. Well, actually, I appreciate you being open about it. You've come in here very vulnerable, and I'm actually really pleased to say that you're not really demonstrating any rejection sensitivity, dysphoria. You seem to be very open to this discussion and hearing opposing viewpoints. So that's really good. Thoughts on Kevin Carson and his free market anarchism. I'm not going to pretend that I've read Kevin Carson. I have not. However, in a general sense, I see market anarchism as a means, not an end. So when I hear that people are market anarchists, generally I'm kind of like, kind of not my thing. But, the way I look at it is you're going to have a market in the interim because you're embedded in a global capitalist system. But you shouldn't be aiming for a market. A market is a fundamentally alienating form of economic organization. One of the most important comments I've gotten here, iOS on Android says, hi, your beard is cool. Thank you. Thank you. That's what I like to hear. Russian name says, how would you answer the libertarian argument? Why can't anarchists do their commune like the Amishes do? Very odd argument. The anarchists do, of course, do communes, but the anarchists don't just want to like disappear off into the wilderness and make communes. They're not trying to disconnect from society. They're trying to transform society. They recognize that there are people who are oppressed, that society is based on this hierarchical oppression, and they've committed themselves to not only prefiguring a new world, but also dismantling the old world, to dismantling the hierarchical society that exists. Anarchists are trying to build the new in the shell of the old. They're not just trying to build something new out in the middle of the forest. Hypnosis says, how do you feel about Luxemburgist and other libertarian-leaning Marxists as compared to anarchists? I haven't read Luxemburg, or rather, I've like skimmed her works, but libertarian Marxism is generally good. Insofar as that I've read anything about like Marxist autonomism or anything, it seems like it's been good. And I kind of commented on council communism earlier in the stream. Psychedelic says, online discourse came up a few times tonight. I'd like to hear your thoughts, your general thoughts about terminally online socialists and anarchists, and if they harm or help spreading lefty ideas. Both. That's the truth. They harm and they help. Gifted another 5 memberships. That's so awesome. Hypnosis. Thank you so much. Another 5 memberships. It's wonderful. You know, I appreciate you enormously. Back to the question, though, they both help and harm. Okay, so they help insofar as that creating this proliferation of the presence of these ideas makes people more willing to entertain those ideas. They're going to be compelled to look into them. They're going to be engaged in argument with people who hold those ideas, and that is going to make them more likely to consider them. However, when they are extremely terminally online, they often make really bad arguments. And y'all, I love you, but anarchists often make very bad arguments and discussions. You know, one that I see anarchists screw up over and over and over and over and over is when people are basically like, well, tell me how this would be done and tell me how that would be done. And instead of even trying to answer it, they just go, well, we just figure it out on the spot. That's a terrible answer. Terrible answer. Don't get me wrong. Lots of people have said it over history, but nobody is going to be convinced by that answer. People know that society is very complex. Things are very interrelated. Anarchists need to commit themselves to thinking about answers to these questions. Now, of course, there's going to come a point where you've given them enough answers. Okay. You've given them a lot of answers. You've told them specifics. You've told them about councils. You've told them about federation. You've told them about consensus. You've told them about, you know, how to resolve disputes and all of this. Okay. And they're still like, you know, well, what's going to be the name of the organization which organizes the highways through northeastern United States? And like, when it gets to that point, of course, you're going to tell them, I don't know, that's up to the people in those federations. I don't know, that's up to the people in those councils. But like, you need to at least give them the basics, yo. Like, give them at least the base concept of how decision making is going to work at the small, medium, and large scale in a future society. Give them something to chew on. This idea that we can't give them anything lest we give them a perfect blueprint. No, I disagree. Just get into the habit, learn and understand what anarchists advocate, get into the habit of telling people how that would work. But yeah, no, there's this extremely edgy, you know, orientation online where people seem to think that they are more radical by means of that they alienate more people from their perspective, that there are more people that find them unappealing, that their radicalism is associated with that they are like so militant, they don't even have allies. That is not militant. That's not militant. You're not going to transform society like that. So you're not you're not more radical. You're less radical. You're more radical in measure to your ability to transform conditions and your actual real outcome in transforming conditions. Okay. Actually convincing people, actually building organizations, actually encouraging them to do things, actually becoming something that is in opposition to the power structure. Okay. And you're not doing those things when all you're doing is turning people away, when all you're doing is making people upset, when all you're doing is making people hate you, when all you're doing is whittling away your friend group until you're in a tinier and tinier and tinier echo chamber because you are just too pure and holy to be able to deal with people who have problematic ideals and who need time and help and effort trying to get rid of the internal conditioning that this society has put in their mind. And if you really got to, reject this knee-jerk reaction to people telling you things you don't like and telling you they believe things you don't like, and you need to overcome that. You need to practice self-scrutiny and self-control and discipline and not freak out on the people who disagree with you, because that is actively harmful to changing conditions. It not only is going to mean now you have less allies, but it also means that person probably considers you unserious and they consider your ideology unserious now. So I want you to really think about the consequences of your knee-jerk reactions when that happens. So yeah, it has its ups and downs, right? It's good and bad. The proliferation of these spaces has given us this opportunity to interface, but it's also made a lot of people think that their online identity is a form of radicalism, that identifying as an anarchist means they're a radical. This is not to insult any of you who this is as far as you are on your journey, but I'd like to encourage you to think about how you can actually transform conditions. This is the measure by which you are becoming more radical. Clatari, I noticed a lot of us autistic people are anarchist. Yes, I think there's a very good reason for this. Autistic people and people with ADHD tend to recognize when structures are highly arbitrary. They're generally systems thinkers. They're generally very analytic. And so they look around the world and they realize the inherent irrationality of the world that they're in, right? They also have this tendency, they have justice sensitivity or injustice sensitivity. They look at things that are unjust and it revolts them. They can't stand it, right? And that goes back to that thing I was just saying about the knee jerk. Okay. But it's good to have the feeling that injustice makes you upset and that a fire burns inside you to fix the problems. But what I want to encourage you to understand is that this is not to get too off topic here, is that knee jerk, that justice sensitivity or injustice sensitivity, it needs to be harnessed into real transformation of conditions and not just lashing out at people who are making you upset on the internet. But I agree with you. In fact, this is maybe a controversial opinion, but I think I've said before that I think autistic and ADHD people are the shock troopers of revolution, because they're the sorts of people that they just are always going to reject the conditioning of society, or most of the time they're going to be capable of rejecting the conditioning of society. They have a high sensitivity to injustice. They're systems thinkers and they're very analytic more often. These things are all just more often. It's not always the case. And so with that in mind, they are willing to go against the grain. They're willing to take risks and to sacrifice of themselves for others and to spread ideas doggedly that they think will transform society, and to study and study and study and learn and develop new ideas and concepts which they hope might transform things. This is not to say, of course, that these are only conditions of people with autism or ADHD. I just think that, there's a reason why in our spaces, there are lots of people with autism and ADHD. And I think this is part of the reason why. So anyway. Andrew P., are you a historical materialist? And if so, do you believe Leninism is consistent with it? Personally, I think it's not, because it doesn't solve the primary contradiction of capitalism. Yeah, as I was saying, I kind of answered a question kind of like this earlier in the stream. Oof, that one got me. I think that first you have to define what you mean by historical materialism. Earlier in the stream, I mentioned there are kind of like several different ways of understanding what it even means. If what you mean is that there is a primary contradiction that is based in the economy in every single era, and the conflict between the classes determines the procession of society, then kind of, yeah, I just think it's more complicated than just economic classes. It's more about distribution of power and the development of power structures. But if that's what you mean, then yeah, I think most anarchists are. And Leninists or authoritarian leftists are actually not in that sense, because in fact, they developed the very structures which safeguard the existing power structures. So yeah, but if you want afterwards, go rewatch the stream and you'll see where I discuss that. Numerous people are like, anarcho-autist gang. So I got a $20 donation from Charles Graves. Thank you so much. It's very generous. Hey, Anark, do you think that the anarchist movement is becoming too focused on postmodern philosophies of power rather than organizing labor and building networks for direct action and mutual aid? I have my own personal criticisms about postmodernism and its conceptions of power. I think sometimes it's right to just think about things in terms of power, but I think that it sometimes is not very grounded in understanding what power is and how it functions. Instead of trying to develop a methodology for understanding power, often it just tries to use power as a way to understand distortion of real things. So like it would talk about, oh, there's an economy and it has this nominal function and then power distorts it in this way. Or there's knowledge and it has this nominal function and then power distorts it in this way. I think this is the wrong way to look at it. I develop an alternative conception of power in my work. Power, that's what it's called, power. I think it's really important to understand how power structures actually function. I'm a meta-modernist. So I'm not a modernist. I'm not a postmodernist. I'm a meta-modernist. I'm trying to move past both of these traditions, trying to move into a new synthesis where we recognize what worked and didn't work in both of those philosophies and trying to resynthesize in the modern era. I think we've moved past the postmodern era. I think we are in the meta-modern era. And so I have criticisms about postmodernism for that reason. And however, I think what you're recommending, the just organizing labor, you're not. You're saying, and building networks for direct action and mutual aid. I think that's the right way to go. You have to begin building power structures from the bottom up, horizontal power structures. And yeah, I think the problem with postmodernism, the effect of postmodernism on our movement has largely been that as people have fallen more and more into postmodernist philosophy, they tend to be more and more consumed with aesthetics, culture production, and street politics. These seem to be the things that the movement became entirely focused around after postmodernist philosophy, sort of permeated into the movement. It seems like, and I'll explain what I mean by those. Aesthetics, I kind of just talked about that earlier. People think that having a Twitter profile that says anarchist or sterner or whatever makes them radical. And I think this is actually really, common. This is really common. Then you've got, culture production. This actually comes from the Frankfurt School, this idea that culture is upstream from politics. I think that's false. I don't think there is any upstream. Politics, economics, culture, all these varieties of different aspects in society, none of them are quote unquote upstream from one another. They are all mutually determining. You have to act in all of these fields simultaneously. So I think postmodernism has people too obsessed with thinking about only how culture or art works and not thinking enough about how to develop power structures. And then the last of these is street politics. And I think that's because street politics really facilitates these previous two things. It's all about aesthetics. It's all about development of culture. It changes the conversation. But it doesn't really change how power works. And insofar as your street politics are just protests, then it also doesn't develop power which lasts and has any capability to change conditions. So long way of getting at this here, but Universal Ron says, I really like your mushroom shirt. Hell yeah, I like this mushroom shirt. It's a good shirt, huh? Sorry, I'm just reading through things here. You know, I've been kind of rambling for long enough that a whole bunch of stuff has passed by. Margot Sorn says, how to deal with interpersonal issues within anarchist spaces, specifically informal hierarchies. Also, for the sake of some things, do you work with other leftists, for example, for higher wages or BLM? Dealing with interpersonal issues is actually one of the hardest parts. I consider it one of the most unsolved things in the modern era. And that's because people really are not very good at interpersonality. I think that it's going to require us to first accept that we are doing it wrong right now, that our approach to dealing with interpersonal problems is not correct, that we are punitive, we are judgmental, that we see other human beings as being very disposable. We like to justify it as defending victims, but most of the time it's really not. It is just us being punitive to others. It's just us being exclusionary, trying to find ways to kick people out of our spaces, and it leads to dwindling organizational power. It leads to us having less and less ability to change conditions. So I think we need to be coming into it with a belief that people are capable of change, and that there really are ways to remedy situations where people have done wrong. And of course I work with other leftists, but I'm not necessarily sure what you mean by that. You might mean authoritarian leftists. If you mean authoritarian leftists, no, I categorically do not work with them, except if, of course, if we have like a protest or something. I got a $5 donation by Eric Gray. He asks, how important is it for those of us who are Black anarchists to challenge Black media figures like Phil Scott, Tariq Nasheed, and Roland Martin, etc.? I think it's kind of like my answer to the should we be debating right-wingers question. It's like, if it can be done in a way which is effective and which uses their platform in order to deconvert people from their ideals, if they have these sort of right-wing or authoritarian conceptions, then it's probably good on net. But if we commit ourselves to that all the time, if that's all we spend our time on, we're going to generally tend to water down our rhetoric. We're going to spend our time, instead of thinking about how to build something in a constructive sense, about how to build new structures, we're going to be constantly orienting around how to deconstruct, how to criticize, how to tear down old things. And in the process, it's weird, but it ends up with you watering down your rhetoric a lot of the time. This is kind of something I mentioned earlier about debaters. So I think it should be done in measure. I think that it shouldn't be a focus for everybody. I think it's something that should be understood as one possible tool, like making comments under their tweets or something. Yeah, might be good. But, spending all your time trying to figure out how to debate them, probably not. Probably not. Mo Plum asks, is there anything of worth in Marx's reply to Stirner? Do you see a contradiction in how they think about alienation? It's weird because I could swear I've read this reply, but now I'm trying to think about where it was. What was the name of it? The German Ideology. No, I did not read through this. But I would be down to read it. That sounds like that would be very interesting. I agree with about 50% of Marx's critique of Proudhon. I would almost assume that it's going to be the same here with Stirner. Poisonous Badge says, do anarchists align more with social democrats or Marxist-Leninists? Neither. Honestly, social democrats aren't that different from Marxist-Leninists. Marxist-Leninists, I see as being insurrectionary social democrats. They're basically just social democrats who are willing to use guns to get social democracy. Dovey asks, do you agree with the collaboration with other socialists or leftists or left unity in order to achieve a common goal? No, I do not believe in left unity. I think left unity is a lie. I think that the other part, the authoritarian left, is really not our allies. Both their methods and their ends are not the same. And insofar as we help them, we actually just help them build structures of exploitation. And that it's really mostly just a net negative. I think that authoritarian left organizations should be marginalized and disempowered. Straight up. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Authoritarian left organizations are parasitic on the masses acting. In almost every single occasion, when the masses are mobilized, they come in and they try to jump into the driver's seat, take advantage of the organic energy which exists, and then try to funnel people into their dead-end vanguards. So no, I consider them enemies. I consider them, near enemies that we have to constantly watch because they are waiting to stab us in the back. Sir Verbose says, no disrespect, but it sounded like you didn't make any argument against SOCDEM. You just said it would prevent revolution. It might backslide, but those aren't arguments. I mean, those are arguments against the system itself. Unless what you're saying is that's your end goal. If that's your end goal, then yeah, I guess. If your end goal is social democracy, then yeah, social democracy, it works. Social democracy is indeed social democracy. However, if you are a social democrat because you see it as a proximal point on the path, then no, everything I just said is a strong argument against it. If you're a revolutionary and you're a social democrat as a means to achieve revolution, or you want social democracy in the meantime, then everything I just said is a complete refutation. But if your goal is social democracy, then yeah, I mean, social democracy is in fact social democracy. Andrew P. Any thoughts on medieval Ireland? ANCAPs often claim it was stateless, which would be very interesting if true. ANCAPs love trying to retell history to imagine that their anarcho-capitalism has ever existed. But in reality, anarcho-capitalism has never existed because it's impossible. You can't have anarcho-capitalism. Capitalism is predicated on monopolization of power in the hands of a narrow ruling class, the owners of private property. And for that reason, it's literally impossible to have anarcho-capitalism because as soon as you get monopolization of power, there has to be means by which those who have the monopolized power defend their property from being, appropriated by the people they're exploiting to get that property. So in capitalism, that means that you're going to have a state. And they say, oh, well, we're not going to have bureaucracy. We're not going to have a formal state structure, but they're just going to create state structures in the process. Once you concentrate a bunch of power into the hands of the capitalists, they will create private militias and kangaroo courts, the arbitration courts, which just serve the interests of the corporations themselves. And they won't really give a shit what happens to the masses of people that they are exploiting. Anarcho-capitalism is 100% a pipe dream, which can't exist. And that's why they have no examples of it existing. It's the reason why they have to go back and look at history and then just mistranslate what took place to pretend that that was anarcho-capitalism. Anarcho-capitalism is impossible. It literally only exists in concept. In your opinion, should anarchist orgs be part of student unions? And if yes, what actions do you think they should take? Yeah, they absolutely should. They should be part of student unions, just like they should be part of all kinds of unions. They should be pushing for the student unions to, number one, be horizontal, and number two, to have control of their departments. Obviously, you hear that and you go, oh my God, that's ridiculous. But that is a revolutionary goal in the context of a university, right? That doesn't mean that you're going to ask for that at the negotiating table off the bat, but that's what you should be pushing for. Democratizing the way that the department runs, democratizing the hiring and firing of professors, democratizing the curriculum, democratizing, all of that stuff. If you do, you're going to find that there will be bottom-up power in the students and the grad students and all of that, which is going to diffuse exploitation and abuse by professors and by the structure of the school. However, easier said than done. Good luck if that's what you want to do. I have never done it myself, but that's the concept which is operative in how anarchists approach every hierarchical power structure. JP says, what do you think about reaction most people have when they hear the words anarchy or anarchism? And what would you suggest to make people less reactionary to hearing those things mentioned? There's kind of two approaches. The approach that I generally take is just I use the words openly and then I explain what they mean. And when people hear them explained, they generally don't have that same knee jerk afterwards. After I explain that anarchy is the absence of hierarchical power structures, and that anarchism is essentially a method for achieving that, the goal of anarchy itself, and an ideological or theoretical framework for understanding how power is distributed, generally they're more amenable to the discussion. So I take that position of using the words and then defining them for people. And when I do that, most people are much more open. However, there's the opposite approach, which lots of people take, and that is not using the words and just explaining the concept. And then at the end being like, yeah, so that's why I call myself an anarchist. But yeah. Isidro says, I'm a printmaker and a full-time commercial truck driver who uses visual art as part of my anarchist praxis. Of course, agitating and organizing are just as important. Yeah, I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying when I was making those criticisms about culture production earlier, that it's like bad. You have to, that's just part of the struggle, right? Like culture production, you need culture production, but you also need organization to develop power for the masses. So like, yeah, once again, I'm not taking the either or perspective. I'm taking the all of the above perspective. So you have to do all of those, and we have to support people that are doing all of those, and we have to coordinate all of the different things together. That's what it's going to require, because those are all things that are part of a functioning society. And part of prefiguration is trying to create the new in the shell of the old. So we're trying to develop as much of the future society within current conditions as possible. That requires creating the fighting bodies, that requires the culture production, it requires all of the above. So I'm clearly very far behind because people are referring to things I said a while back. Faraz, can you clarify IFBs and balanced job complexes and participatory economics? I don't understand how IFBs run into problems of conventional planning and balanced job complexes. Doesn't make sense to me. I know what balanced job complexes are, but I don't know what you mean by IFB. IFB, let's go see what you mean. IFB Paracon. Oh, Iteration Facilitation Board. Okay, I actually am not as familiar with that exact aspect as I would like to be. I'll click through to this Wikipedia real quick just to familiarize myself. Oh, okay. These are just the boards that coordinate the decisions by the workers and by consumers. Well, the thing is that the planning doesn't really take place at the level of this IFB and Paracon. It takes place at the level of the household. I think that's a really important thing to understand about how Paracon functions. In Paracon, everything starts by people declaring what their household needs. Okay, so they sort of lay out for the coming year what their household needs. And then this series of ledgers about the needs of households, which of course themselves can be edited as time goes on, those get taken to the rest of the planning apparatuses. They get taken to the organizations as they work. They get taken to those administrative boards, and these get used in order to determine what's going to take place in production, whether production needs to expand, whether production can contract, whether workers that are in one area can work in another area, and so on and so on. And so there's essentially planning in every component. You got planning in the workplace, you've got planning in the households, and you've got the coordination of the planning in those places. Balanced job complexes take place in the workplace. A balanced job complex is where what they try to do is they say, okay, there are a series of things that need to be done in the workplace. Somebody's got to clean the toilets. Somebody's got to do the paperwork. Somebody's got to work on the factory line making widgets. Somebody's got to, and so on and so on. And what you do is you have everybody sort of vote on their preferences, and you create complexes of jobs where they have a distribution of all of those jobs, so that people are not just doing, not becoming super specialized, but instead everybody is developing a diverse set of skills. So that's what's going on there. You know, you'd have everybody doing a little bit. You know, if nobody wants to do the toilet work, that means everybody's going to be doing a little bit of the toilet work, right? So that's essentially what's going on. You're going to distribute the tasks to everyone. You're going to, and if somebody really is cool with doing the toilet work, then yeah, they can do the toilet work. But if everybody doesn't want to do it, everybody's going to do a little bit. But there's a lot more detail if you read the book, what is it? No Bosses by Michael Albert. Andrew P. says, I think your modern anarchism is groundbreaking and will help anarchists adjust to the modern age. If only more people knew about it. Well, I appreciate that. I plan to continue looking for mechanisms to distribute it to more people. The video essays are just one way that I plan on doing that. Obviously, I have been, working to get it published, and you'll continue to see more efforts on that front. But a lot of it is also on y'all. Y'all got to spread it around. You got to tell people about it. You got to cite it to others. Use its means in order to reason about the world, and use its phraseology in conversation. Those things are essentially, citation in our sort of horizontal academic space. Okay, I'm going to have to skip through because I think I'm doing this thing I usually do where I get too far behind. This is another Russian name, but they say, is it fair to describe anarcho-capitalism as a fascist ideology, or at least as being reminiscent of fascism in key ways? I think that it's going to, well, first of all, they mostly collaborate with fascists. Their main allies are fascists, but also it's probably going to devolve into fascism. So I think that a lot of what's going on, because they are okay with the development of hierarchies, they're also going to be okay with the development of ethno-states. And these ethno-states are going to take the guise of corporations, which will themselves, once again, have private militias and arbitration courts, which will be essentially kangaroo courts, which do what they say because they own them. And very likely, they're just going to reestablish the state in its true form. They're going to be creating centralization to coordinate for the interests of the corporations. And I think that most ANCAPs would be shocked to find how fast that will simply devolve back into fascism, wherein the corporations are cooperating with the central state apparatus in order to carry out a sort of militaristic ethnic campaign. However, do they actually say they want ethno-nationalism? That kind of differs. If somebody calls themselves a Hoppian, yeah, they're basically a fascist in ANCAP clothing. But there's a variety of different ANCAPs. Some of them not big fans of their fascist allies, which are always right next door. But sadly, most ANCAPs are totally okay with the fact that they are friends with fascists. And like many anarchists who are friends with authoritarian leftists, they will be useful idiots when the time comes when those authoritarians gain power. So if any ANCAP that knew anything about how power functioned would be against right unity, you might say, but you'll notice that never really happens. €5 from Psychedelic says, a hard copy of A Modern Anarchism would make a great gift for a friend. Can someone in the UK order one? I know it might be a big ask. Yeah. If anybody is trying to get their friends into it, I will say A Modern Anarchism, not really an introductory text. I would say it's kind of an advanced text, but insofar as that y'all are like, you have a friend who already kind of has some grasp of politics, it would be a good one for them to learn from. A Modern Anarchism would probably, debunk a lot of their misconceptions about what anarchism is. So, yeah. David B says, would you ever debate a Marxist-Leninist if you had the opportunity? Yeah, under the conditions that I thought that they would act in good faith, that I actually thought that they would be a good debate partner. But what I see is that a lot of Marxist-Leninists engage in debate, and then what they do is they devolve into insults, and they demean their opponent, and they also just lie, make things up. But I think that's, once again, I said earlier in the stream, authoritarian leftism is predicated around lying, sophistry. They just pass around talking points that don't have anything to do with history, and they regurgitate them as if they're true. And I can see it in my comments all the time. I was literally just responding to a guy who just literally gave me like 15 lies in a row because he'd heard them in some authoritarian left Discord server, probably. So insofar as that I think they would participate in those behaviors, no, I don't really see the point. But under certain conditions where I thought that person would engage in good faith and was actually open to the conversation, really having a real back and forth debate about what took place, yeah, under certain conditions. But I'm not going to be seeking that out because, once again, I just think there's a lot of perverse incentives at that, and I've explained to them earlier. Lily says, you've spoken before about boycotts needing to be highly organized and giving BDS as an example of an effective boycott. Can you speak to the specifics of what you see as making a boycott organized? It needs to have clear goals, which need to be stated and understood between all the people. It needs to be organized in the sense that it is associated with organizations that are carrying it out and maintaining it. It needs to have lots of people on board, which means those organizations need to push that boycott out in public. It needs to be popularized. There needs to be lots of popular adoption, and it needs to have clear targets. Okay, it can't just be this vague, nebulous thing that goes everywhere and includes all these products that there's so many that nobody could possibly do it. It needs to have clear targets that everybody goes, oh, I know those targets. One thing that's great about how BDS works is BDS has very clear targets. Those clear targets make it to where, like, for example, Sabra Hummus or SodaStream. The reason why I can recall those off the top of my head is because BDS is organized, because they've made clear what some of those products are so that you can always recall what they are when you go into the supermarket. You have to make it to where there's a low cognitive overhead for people that are doing the boycott. If the boycott requires somebody to remember 1,000 brands they have to boycott, it's not going to work. If there's no like agreement on which brands are being boycotted, it's not going to work. If organizations are not pushing the boycott, it's not going to work. Like, you have to have all these things to make it work. But if you do, yes, it can have some effect. But personal boycotts, I consider useless. They don't deliver any kind of signal. There has to be a public campaign that is associated with your decision to boycott. Corporations do not look at their bottom line and say, oh, looks like Joe boycotted us this month, right? There has to be a public campaign associated with your boycott. So it can't be open to the interpretation of economists and open to the interpretation of corporations. Corporations interpret a lot less than you think they do. Anyway. Let's see. We got 2 donations. Eric Gray for $5. He says, so far I've been successful in getting more black people to be open to anarchism and to read books such as Anarchism and the Black Revolution. Yeah, that book is fantastic. I recommend that book to everyone. Like black, white, whatever. Anarchism and the Black Revolution is one of the best, I would say, like beginner to intermediate texts on anarchism I've ever seen. It even has some parts that are kind of advanced. Like it's a fantastic text. And the new edition that was released, I think it was called like what was it? The final edition or something like that. I don't remember. Is phenomenal. It has so much to it. It has so much content to it. It not only covers what anarchism is and its history, it also talks about how it relates to white supremacy. It also talks about the modern adoption of anarchism by black people, the role of white people in the struggle against white supremacy as anarchists. It's so good. It's fantastic. And, you know, a lot of black anarchists have mentioned that anarchism should be appealing to the black population. It should be appealing to most populations that are the underclass that have been forced under the boot of some hierarchical power structure. You know, it should be popular among stateless peoples. It should be popular among enslaved peoples. And I think that it just requires that we all do the work of popularizing it everywhere. And some amount of that is always going to come down to the people who are in those oppressed communities doing the job of spreading it in those communities. You know, like I'm just some white dude, right? If I came into a black community and started telling them they should be anarchist, they're naturally going to view me as an outsider and as probably then are going to see anarchism as a white philosophy. In fact, as we know, this has happened a lot. But when somebody in the black community comes to other black people and tells them about anarchism, that's naturally going to be more appealing. It's going to diffuse a lot of those concerns. And that has generally been the goal, the method which has worked for anarchists for a long time. You make inroads into the parts of those communities that are already sympathetic, you radicalize them, and then they autonomously begin doing the work of creating a constituency for that revolutionary potential within their community. And in fact, this happened a long time ago in Jewish communities, and Jewish communities have had strong anarchist presence ever since. And so, yes, I think that we're actually seeing a big surge of black anarchism in the modern era. And it was a huge peak in black anarchism back in the George Floyd protests. That was a huge influx of black anarchists. And I think it's going to continue to grow because now there are more black anarchists and they're making material. You know, you've got like Andrewism, for example, right? Andrewism, I think, made his channel during the George Floyd protests, and I promoted it during the George Floyd protests. But now Andrewism is a way bigger channel than I am, and he's a black anarchist. He's promoting black anarchism. So it just has to continue like this. Yes, Eric, there we go. The definitive edition. Yes. The Anarchism and the Black Revolution, the definitive edition is really good. Really good. But yeah. Let's see. Hypnosis. Oh, Psychedelic for €2 says, no, I meant hard copy. I only saw a PDF in your link. No, that is that right there. What that link I gave, that is a pre-order for a hard copy for part 2. It hasn't been published yet. Let me find you part 1. Part 1. Here is part 1. Part 1 actually has been published. So here is the link for part 1 of A Modern Anarchism. You can go get a hard copy of that right now. So Hypnosis for another $5. Thank you, Hypnosis. You've been very generous this time around. I really appreciate it. He says, how do we combat the fear of working people to engage with radical organizations? I think this is like pretty much the same answer in every single one of these contexts, right? It's almost like what I was just, you basically have to engage in their struggle, right? How do we combat the fear of working people to engage with radical organizations? Radical organizations need to engage with the struggles of working people. If they start engaging, if they demonstrate their solidarity, then things will begin to change. But what we have right now is that radical organizations are like, we're here for the working class. Working class, come join us. And they look around and the working class is like, okay, well, are you going to actually do something to help us? And we're like, well, you need to come join us, then we'll help you. It's like, no. It goes the opposite way around. Solidarity is an action. It's an open, continued conversation wherein you go and you engage in the struggle of an oppressed people. You demonstrate your solidarity through action. If you care about working people as a radical organization, you need to go engage in the things in changing the conditions of their oppression. And that's true in every one of these situations. Why did anarchism grow big in George Floyd? Because anarchists showed the fuck up. They showed the fuck up, right? They demonstrated solidarity through action in the George Floyd protests. So that is going to generally be the answer to these questions in every condition. Marxist-Leninist 1917, hello, says, what's your view on the former Yugoslavia? I heard they had a lot of worker ownership. Yeah, Yugoslavia is really interesting because I consider Yugoslavia and Chile to be the actual best examples for state socialism. It's funny because I've said this to authoritarian leftists before, is that I find it really weird that they emphasize the USSR and China and Cuba and Venezuela, where the workers did not have power in any of those situations. The workers were all subverted to the power of their central parties. The central parties made the decisions. The workers only had the power to elect people to higher and higher positions. But in Chile and Yugoslavia, there were real implementation of worker control. But my problem with both of them is they demonstrate the fragility of a hierarchical system. So Yugoslavia relied on the existence of Tito. There was a lot of ethnic strife in Yugoslavia at the time, but a lot of the reason why things were held together was because Tito was a very well-respected figure in all aspects of their society. So people were like, cool, we'll stop with our pogroms and everything because Tito is the dude, right? And in the process, he was kind of a benevolent dictator, and he basically tried to develop a real worker ownership in Yugoslavia. So they had huge proliferation of cooperatives, and these cooperatives were coordinated together by economic councils at various layers. So it was like confederation of councils at various layers, and they made almost all the economic decisions. So I consider it to be an example of state socialism. And people have pointed out to me before that sometimes I'm being a little hyperbolic when I say there's never been state socialism, because there has in fact been Yugoslavia and Chile. And Chile had a very similar situation with Allende. Okay, Allende was a highly respected figure. People in almost every aspect of society liked him, obviously with some exceptions, as we know, given that a coup took place. But Allende was very respected, and there was a lot of worker ownership. Cybersyn had a lot of aspects of worker ownership from the bottom up. Now, there are problems in both of these. There were aspects wherein the workers still could not make some decisions, wherein they were still subverted to the state apparatus. But in both occasions, the hierarchical power was flimsy. It was fragile, as I talk about in my most recent video, and you'll probably find it with the thumbnail, Hierarchy is Fragile. This is an example of how hierarchy is fragile. All they had to do was smash the head off the system, and they were just able to coup the system ridiculously fast. Part of what is required to create a durable socialist system which can actually replace the system, the current society, is that we have to create mechanisms by which, from the bottom up, the workers actually own and administrate society, rather than the state giving them permission to do so. So Yugoslavia and Chile were both very short-lived and fragile, and that's because they had a hierarchy. So they are examples of how state socialism, even when it is implemented in the best case, when you actually have a benevolent dictator who is willing to subvert some extensive amount of their own central power and is willing to subvert the power of the party to some extensive degree, they are still fragile. They are still going to be short-lived, and they're still going to degenerate, either in Tito's case because Tito died, or Yugoslavia's case because Tito died, or in Chile's case because of coup. Hierarchy is just not the method for socialism. it has a bad track record. But those are two interesting examples. Slower Panther says, "Hey, Anark, I'm a young socialist who has recently been re-immersing myself with Marxist and anarchist politics. I have a question, though. How would something like medicine production work under anarchy?" Well, I think a lot of the reason people think that that would be hard is because they don't really understand what anarchists are proposing. Anarchists are proposing that there are going to be enormous numbers of councils that deal with the interests of all kinds of different workplaces and functions in society, and that these are federated together at larger and larger scales to make decisions. So medicine production would take place largely in a way that would be familiar. Scientists and people who have expertise and specialization would be organized together within particular workplaces. The federations of councils would come together in order to make decisions about, distributing resources that would go towards constructing facilities and bringing together pertinent specialists who can, create processes, repeatable processes, and specialists who can then therefore implement those processes. And this would then take place and medicine would be produced and, there would be planning of distribution of the medicine which is produced to people that need it. Of course, it depends on whether you're talking about some sort of mixed system. There are market anarchists but I'm an anarcho-communist. So in my mind, this would just take place through a decentralized planned economy, right? Everybody would tell you, oh, we need insulin. And basically there'd be administrative bodies which would take into account how much insulin is needed. They would then report how much insulin is needed to all of the facilities that are making insulin, and they would adjust production based on demand. And this is, it's not a lot of the reason why people think this would be a challenge is mostly because they don't understand what anarchists are proposing. Anarchists are proposing these federations, larger and larger federations of workers' councils and councils of various kinds who make decisions from the bottom up by delegating specialization in various areas. Psychedelic says, "We Must Go to the People" by Malatesta is crucial reading for what Anark is saying right now. Absolutely. People should definitely read that. In fact, some of the criticisms and comments I've been making over the course of this live stream are mirrored by Malatesta in that essay, "We Must Go to the People." So people should definitely read that. Nina, hey Nina, good to see you, says, "Hey Anark, as far as theorists go, I've had a fixation on Voltairine de Cleyre for a while, so I'm curious to know if you've read any of her work. Also, greetings from former Yugoslavia." Yeah, well, I hope you caught my little ramble about Yugoslavia there. But no, I actually have not read her work. That's one of those that numerous people have recommended that I read. If you just want to put what you think the best starter text for her would be in the chat, that'd be great just to get me started. Heretic says, "What do you think about the monopolization of violence in the context of creating successful federations or collectives? The risk posed by external entities willing to use violence is a problem." Well, I guess I'm not necessarily sure about what you mean with that first sentence. What do you think about the monopolization of violence in the context of creating successful federations or collectives? See, in my mind, when you create federations and those federations all together have the collective use of violence, this is demonopolization of violence. Because what you're doing is you're increasing the number of power holders. In our society, the state has monopoly control over violence, and that's a very, very narrow control. You think about it, the only people who get to decide on the use of that violence are the police and the military. We don't get any say in it. In fact, our president is the head of the military here in the United States. So that is highly monopolized, very centralized. So what that means is the vast majority of people, 99.99999% of people, have no control over the use of violence. In an anarchist or horizontal method, what you're doing is you're demonopolizing the use of violence. You're distributing it among a huge number of militias, which are themselves controlled by the people through council structures. So it's not that what you're doing is getting rid of the use of violence. What you're doing is you are decentralizing the militia structure such that now from the bottom up, we have control over the use of violence and then can therefore defend ourselves. You might think of it more like an immune system approach. Okay, so when a part of your immune system is like harmed by a bacteria or something, right? Your whole body does not go into immune response unless it's really bad, right? If there's just a little piece of bacteria, like, in the tip of my finger or something, I'm just going to get an immune response that accords to the tip of my finger. However, if it starts getting infected and it starts spreading throughout my blood and I start getting an infection that spreads throughout the rest of my body, then the rest of my body is going to start having a bigger and bigger immune response. And the more and more of my body is going to participate in the immune response to deal with that infection. Decentralized military is the same way. Right? If the problem is extremely local, if it's just a problem like, in our community, we've got a problem with like some white supremacists hurting people, then you might only need the militia at that scale. But let's say the militia at that scale can't deal with it. Well, then maybe you'd include a few more militias just in that area, or militias that are just, have made it their interest to deal with white supremacists, right? And you get militias from the surrounding areas to come help with it. But if you're dealing with a state structure that is countervailing you from the outside, trying to destroy all of your structures, then yeah, you're going to need a much more concerted immune response, right? You're going to need much more of those militias, which are organized decentrally, to begin then coordinating together at a mass scale in order to coordinate the response to defend the collective from this insurgency. So I hope that kind of makes sense to you, because I saw you were using the language of monopoly of violence, and I wanted to clarify my conception of monopolization and demonopolization of power. Malaysia says, the amount of anarchism as anti-organization I've heard is insane. Yeah, well, it's unfortunately a very common perception. Lots of people that think that's the case, even on the left. And it is unfortunately it's because of two things. First of all, prevailing power structures have spread that lie. Okay. So they've proliferated the idea that anarchy means chaos. Anarchism means lack of organization. Then you've got authoritarian left-wingers who've also proliferated that idea. They think that anarchism is just all this like spontaneous, figure it out on the spot kind of stuff, right? And lastly, I just want to say, a lot of anarchists have made it easy for them by saying those kinds of things themselves. So part of that is because from about the 60s to the 2000 aughts, anti-organizationalist and individualist anarchism was really big. And it wasn't only big in the United States, it was big in a lot of places on Earth. And I think that did a huge damage to the perception of anarchism in every one of these spheres being discussed, among radicals, in the popular perception in society. And, they were just openly avowing anti-organizationalist state positions. And that didn't really reach its high watermark or rather come to an end until I would say Occupy. So I'd say the end of the dominance of that perspective was essentially went from the 60s to 2011 or 2012-ish, right? And that was the end of it. Now we're seeing a resurgence of organizational anarchism, a resurgence of social anarchism, which was the dominant trend before the 60s. And that means that according to that, anarchism is now growing again. Anarchism is now actually gaining more adherents because it turns out organization is necessary. Coordination is good. A lack of organization is not good. It leads to lack of coordination. It leads to lack of power. So Palm Dad says, how much religious freedom would religious people have in an anarchist society? As much as doesn't harm others. Pretty straightforward, actually. You can believe whatever you want as long as you do not harm others or enforce your beliefs on others. Bolin says, hi, I currently consider myself a Marxist since around a year. I'm organizing in a socialist organization in my country, but man, you really made me question a lot of stuff literally today. Well, I'm glad to hear it. I just want to be clear that I don't really have a problem with Marx per se. I just have a problem with authoritarian leftism. So what you're going to find is a lot of the time if somebody calls themselves Marxist, they don't actually mean that they adhere to Marx. They mean that they adhere to Lenin and Mao and Stalin, who I really don't think were very good Marxists. I recommend that if you are still interested in Marxism, even after some of these things I've said, that you actually read Marx. And no, I don't mean read Engels. I mean read Marx. Read the economic manuscripts. Read the Grundrisse. Actually read him. And I think what you'll find is that you're probably not going to be an authoritarian afterwards. He was not a very authoritarian thinker. So... But I would highly recommend that while you're doing that, also begin reading Anarchism. Read Malatesta. Read, as we said, Lorenzo Camboa Irvin. In fact, Lorenzo Camboa Irvin will further critique authoritarian leftism for you. He will critique Marxist-Leninism in Anarchism and the Black Revolution. So that might actually be a good place for you to go. Go read Anarchism and the Black Revolution by Lorenzo Camboa Irvin. Lorenzo was himself part of the Black Panthers. Okay, so this is not some guy, this is not an armchair critic, okay? Lorenzo Camboa Irvin was part of the Black Panthers, literally had to flee the United States because of political persecution by the United States government, okay? He went to prison and became an anarchist in prison. And this book is both a wonderful introduction to anarchism and a sustained critique of the Marxist-Leninism and Maoism that he once believed. And if you want to learn more about anarchism and you're enjoying my content, I highly recommend you watch A Modern Anarchism. Those videos are going to really fill in your foundations, I think. Or if you want something a little more introductory, watch the video Power. Heretic says, I mean an organized army with a hierarchy. Well, I don't know. I guess I thought I kind of gave you my thoughts on that, but saw somebody. Oh, Himbasaurus gave $5. Thank you very much, Himbasaurus. I appreciate it. Y'all have been so generous today. I really, really appreciate it. In fact, I was kind of concerned that because I was light on videos this month that I wasn't going to, make a lot of money, and that was like kind of worrying for me. But y'all really came through on the stream. I appreciate that. Your question is, or your statement, I suppose, is shout out to Anarchism Boss and Mycology, mushroom emoji, Tyrannosaurus emoji, leaf blowing in the wind emoji. Also, stay strong, yo. It's easy to turn to easy shit like video games, but stay real. I mean, I do play Magic the Gathering. I like Magic the Gathering. Okay, just let me have my nerdy pleasures. But no, I mean, I appreciate the sympathy. John Doe says, will capitalists eventually be forced to take measures against climate change, or will we have to do a revolution? Sometimes I feel doomer because it seems like change is too far away. I try not to do future telling. The way I look at it is, if we want things to change, there are a necessary set of steps. We have to begin building power now. And I know when we look at the power we're building, it seems small, but that's the thing, is all big things start small. Trees don't start as trees, they start as seeds. Okay. So if you want trees, you need to plant seeds. And I know it's real hard sometimes to think in that long term, because it's like, dang, things are already going so bad. But if what you need is trees, you better start planting seeds. Okay. Because if, 30 years go by, and it would have taken you 30 years to have a tree, and instead all you did was lament, oh, there's no trees, oh, there's no trees, oh, there's no trees for 30 years. Well, of course you didn't plant seeds. The moment you realized there needed to be trees, if you had planted seeds 30 years later, you would have had trees. But when it's like everybody's got this all backwards. They just want everything to exist already. They want us to already have power already. So my recommendation is begin doing things which can actually develop into something else. Begin doing things which can grow the power of the people from the bottom up. Begin creating horizontal power structures in the here and now in whatever capacity you have available to you. And I think you'll find that your hopelessness will begin to fade and you will begin to focus your mind upon the tasks at hand. And this is what I recommend. Lots of people come to me and tell me they're depressed about the conditions. And I say, well, then start focusing your mind on doing things. And in my experience, that's the reason why that I am not constantly depressed or doomer, is because I focus my mind on doing what is necessary. And I find that it alleviates my feelings of hopelessness considerably. I recommend that you all do the same. Find something you can do and do it. Separate that which you can control and that which you cannot, and focus on that which you can control. And then expand that range of capacity as much as possible. Become more and more capable of changing the world around you. And you'll find that doomer feeling will fade. And the more people do this, the more that doomer shit will be a thing of the past and will have the power to change conditions. So what I wanted to say about that. Also, should say it can't be on here all day. Take a look. I am available for another hour, so I'll be here for about another hour, maybe a little bit less. I need a little bit of time to get ready. Surfer Verbose says, how would education work in an anarchist society? Isn't the teacher-student structure hierarchical? I think probably a good way to start thinking about this, I obviously couldn't tell you exactly how it would be, but a good way to start thinking about this is the free schools. They're sometimes called a modern schools. I think it was a modern escuela because it was in South America or Central America. But the idea of the free schools is that the students are choosing what they're learning, and a teacher acts as an expert, which helps them learn those things. So in a real way, the student and the teacher is not a hierarchy by nature. It is actually just a relation of specialization. Specialization is not a hierarchical power structure by nature. So, when I sit in a room of people, for example, I might have one friend who is really good at baseball. And, me, I'm really good at theory. And another friend of mine, he's a welder, right? And another friend of mine, he's a weightlifter. But that doesn't mean that there's a hierarchy between us. Right? That doesn't mean that because I'm not a weightlifter and I'm not a welder, that the weightlifter and the welder are above me. It means that we all hold different skills, which are all necessary in order to get things done. This is what Bookchin calls complementarity. Okay, this is the horizontal understanding of specialization. We need a bunch of specializations in order for people to all have the skills that are necessary for us all to flourish. And the student who doesn't have that knowledge is just somebody who is trying to attain that specialization. So the student is there to attain a specialization, and the teacher's job, as it is to give them that specialization. But the teacher only has hierarchical power over that student if they get to make decisions for the student. So then that kind of brings us to an aspect wherein there are teacher-student relations that are hierarchical insofar as the teacher is making the decisions, all the decisions about the curriculum, all the decisions about grading, all the decisions about grad students, all those sorts of things. The person at the head of scientific projects, for example, because it's often professors, by the way, in colleges, gets to make all the decisions about how the project proceeds. These are hierarchical relations, but these could be subverted if what we did was we created a school where, say, imagine we're in either K through 12 or university, where the students get to decide the curriculum of things they're going to learn, right? They get to decide what they're going to learn. The teachers that know how to do those things or know those things are just specialists who teach them those things. What we would do in that process is we would devolve the hierarchy back into horizontality, and there'd be complementarity between the learner and the teacher. That being said, going further than this is kind of me offering too much of a specific blueprint. I can give you kind of an idea, but what you would want to do is look at examples of implementation and think of how implementation of these things might take place. Obviously, there's going to be a bunch of complications that I haven't brought up here, but we actually already have some implementations of this concept. It just needs to be solidified and expanded and refined. So yeah, lots of people have talked to me about this. Also, it should be said, David Graeber actually talks about the student-teacher relation. He actually does see it as a relation of authority, but what he calls it is a self-subverting authority. Because in the process of the teacher teaching the student, the teacher loses their leverage over the student, right? That difference between what the concentration of knowledge within the teacher and the lack of concentration of knowledge in the student is subverted in the process of the student being educated. As the student becomes educated, the difference is eliminated. And so this is what Graeber kind of says about it. But yeah. Let's see here, trying to catch up. Okay, I'm just gonna have to skip a bunch of questions. Sufyan says, any tips on what I can do to support the movement as a high schooler? Honestly, what I've recommended to a lot of students who are in K through 12 is just spread like flyers and propaganda like in your school. Like just like leave them in the bathrooms, in the stalls and stuff. Like, you know, put like QR codes that link to anarchist resources and like print out pamphlets and leave them in there and stuff. You know, put stickers on the inside of the inside of the stalls, you know, stuff like that. Try to spread knowledge, because at that stage in your life, you're learning. You know, I'm not expecting you to take over your school, but you can start educating other students at the age you're at. Yeah, Neil Anderson mentions Montessori is kind of like that too. Librarianship can be like that too. Yeah, that's the thing. There's already numerous models, right? Montessori schools also. Yeah, I've heard people who are in Montessori schools who say that it also has that sort of relation that I just described. Might interest you to know that Noam Chomsky went to a free school when he was very young. So clearly it provides good education as well. I mean, he is a very prolific academic and has spent a whole life as a prolific academic. ASCII says, just recently got some extra income and decided to share the love by upping my Patreon contribution. I really appreciate that. I really do. It's like, it sucked because for the last year, my viewership has been growing and my Patreon has been growing, but inflation has blown up so wildly out of control that I'm still just barely making it. So all of you that are helping me slowly beat inflation, I appreciate you. It's like, it seems like, you know, the financial solvency is tantalizingly close. So all of you who become patrons and who become members on the YouTube, I appreciate all of you enormously. I just want to encourage you, if you appreciate the work that I'm doing on this channel, I just want to say that things like this live stream, I didn't used to do these live stream except at big landmarks. You know, those weekly videos I've been doing, I didn't used to do those because I didn't have enough patrons to justify spending all my time on that. But the more patrons I've got, I've started doing these more regularly. Okay. So these have been the outcome of y'all actually becoming patrons, actually becoming members on the YouTube, is that I can spend more and more time actually working on the channel. I can commit to a timetable. I can commit to doing live streams, commit to doing weekly videos. So it actually does make a difference. It's not, you also benefit from it. It's not just an act of charity, even though I really appreciate it. Zal says, I'm curious about who will be at the Andrewisms roundtable on Monday. Is there somewhere else to learn more? No. In fact, generally, I don't really reveal these kind of things ahead of time. I kind of like to let them just pop up. I don't know actually who all is going to be there, but tune in anyway. Chins W Please says, hey, Anark, hope you're doing good. I'm actually doing pretty good. Yeah, I'm in a pretty good mood today. Yeah, you can hear how squeaky my chair is. I bet this thing's going to fall apart soon. Give me more money and I'll buy a new chair. I say that, but it's kind of funny because that's literally what I pitched that to a previous person, and they're like, here you go, buy a new chair. And I bought this chair, and already it's falling apart. Turns out that when you spend all your days like writing and teaching and all of that, you spend a lot of time in your chair. So you kind of break your chairs fast. I appreciate y'all for helping me though, really. Let's see here. Eric Gray says, the free school concept comes up in various black anarchist writings, and it totally makes sense for us. Yeah, I think that honestly, it's going to make sense in most contexts. I think that black communities are kind of like uniquely situated in the sense that they're almost like an internal colony in the United States. And so they're so acquainted with the fact that they are under the boot in every situation, you know, like every single system they're involved in. So yeah, it makes sense. The school would be another place, especially given how devastating the school to prison pipeline is for black populations. Panos Roussis says, have you heard about the Aperanthos community in Naxos, Greece? It was a direct democratic village community similar to Marina Leda, organized by Menolis Glazos for a few decades. I have not. In fact, I actually haven't heard of any of those. But as I said earlier, it's shocking that I forgot Greece when I mentioned prolific places for anarchism. Greece has an enormous history with anarchism and an enormous modern day implementation of anarchism. Harrison asks, where would you like to be in 10 years? This can be accomplishments, relationships, health, etc. I would like to be published numerous times. I would like to, have my books be distributed in bookstores. I would like to be comfortable in my income so that I can quit my second job. That would be great. I would like to, be happy and healthy. Who knows if I'll be healthy, obviously. I don't think I've treated my body particularly well over the course of my lifetime, but we'll see. I'd like to be healthy. Turns out the Greeks say that's one of the important things of being happy later in life. I don't really have the money if my health goes bad to fix that. So yeah, I'd like to have stable relationships. I'd like to have my friends. Yeah, that stuff. I like for the channel to have 1 billion trillion followers. No big deal, just 1 billion trillion. Likely Lad says, which book do you recommend on anarcho-communist economics? The thing is like, the book I can think of which really solidly lays out economics the most articulately is Paracon. But Paracon, I don't know if I would characterize it as anarcho-communist because there is still currency. I wouldn't say there's a market, but there is still currency in that sense. It is a planned economy, a decentrally planned economy. But I would say Paracon is a good place to look. At least it might let you start thinking of ideas. I would also mention if what you're looking for is economic theory about how things currently work, you should read Capital is Power by Bickler and Nitzan. It's basically just laying out how capitalism is a power system and that capital is just a system of concentration and distribution of power. Panos Roussis is correcting my ignorant Americanism. It's pronounced Apiranthos. Glazos wasn't an anarchist, but he was a great socialist figure, defier of the Nazis during their occupation of Greece. I see. Fifa Fern says, progressivism shouldn't be a hard sell, but it seems to be somehow. Andrewism seems to be doing a good job selling it. Yeah, absolutely. Andrewism is great. Big fan. Big fan. Wow, look at that. I caught up. Can you believe that? That's a true rarity for old Daniel here. I was able to, I managed not to ramble endlessly. I actually got to the end of the chat. Incredible. Incredible. The Velociraptor says, do you think Deng Xiaoping would have been way more based if he stayed an anarchist like he was in Paris and the revolutionary that came with that? I mean, I don't know. You know, Deng Xiaoping probably wouldn't have ended up in that position of power if he were an anarchist. Surely, most anarchists didn't end up in that position of power. There was a big deconversion of anarchists before the Chinese Revolution, because there were mass killings of anarchists and communists of all kind that took place by the nationalist government beforehand. And a bunch of people were very hopeless and gave in to very cynical politics. Deng Xiaoping just wouldn't have been the Deng we know if he had, and I doubt he ever would have been in a position to make economic policy. Got another donation from Charles Graves. Again, $20. I appreciate you, Charles. Very generous. Do you have thoughts on anarchists engaging with the modern economics market, like the stock exchange or alternative currencies like crypto, metals, commodities? I invest in silver to have savings I control and not the bank. You know, I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money. I don't think that there's any harm in doing so. It's not as if that system cares whether you do or do not. But I also don't think that it really has any radical effect as well. So, you know, that's the way I look at it. Investing in that stuff is up to you. I do want to say that almost all of those commodities on a long enough time scale are very volatile. I mean, at least chose one that's not very volatile. Silver tends to be not very volatile, but you never know. You really don't. I would say crypto. I mean, this is not financial advice, as everybody likes to say, but probably crypto is too speculative and tumultuous. Probably a bad idea. But yeah, I mean, you know, I get it. I suppose that in my view, I probably wouldn't, because for me, one of my most formative experiences with this was the 2008 financial crisis, which was all about the sort of ephemeral and tumultuous nature of the stock market and investment. So I will never invest in the stock market. I've just seen how it can explode. John Doe, what happened to your aparophobic Twitter account? It has a bunch of nonsensical tweets. My account is no longer aparophobic. That's kind of funny, though. It used to be aparophobic, and then I switched it to Anark YouTube. So somebody might have taken the tag now. They might have the tag aparophobic now that I abandon it. Sapphire says, what do you think about Taoism? I think Taoism is pretty cool. That was actually one of the first religious traditions I read about when I was young. You know, over my life, I've thought a lot about Taoism and kind of tried to interpret and reinterpret what's being said in Taoism. I've had some pretty educated people talk to me about it, talk about how there have been kind of a few different interpretations. Some interpretations of Taoism are very much sort of, how should I put it? Conservative, in the sense that they're just like, you're not going to change the world, just go with the flow and accept your place. And others are not. Others are just kind of more a metaphysical claim about the nature of the universe and the balance of all things. But yeah, Taoism is very interesting. There was a time in my life where I was very, very interested in Taoism and Buddhism. These days, I definitely would not consider myself a Taoist, but there are definitely anarchist Taoists. Sufyan, and I have to try to pronounce the last name, even though I'll look like a fool. Sufyan Walerizak donates $2. Their first time donating. Thank you very much. I appreciate it enormously. Demon Prince says, hey, Anarch, what do you think of some leftists who are positively inspired by Adam Smith, citing him as an inspiration? I mean, that's Marx. Marx literally says that Adam Smith and Ricardo were influential on his work. Adam Smith and Ricardo, or I guess Adam Smith's who you're talking about, but we're just like economists, right? Adam Smith himself held a labor theory of value. He even said things which were vaguely socialistic about worker ownership, but you know, given that he was the foundations of our modern understanding of liberal capitalist economics, it makes sense how he's become appropriated as a strictly capitalist figure. And a lot of the things he said, which were not like directly trying to approve of capitalism, but more describe it, have become descriptions of him approving. So Adam Smith was a more complicated figure than he appeared. And so was the other big foundational capitalist economist, David Ricardo. Both of them were way more complex than they appeared. Both of them held a sort of labor theory of value. Both of them said things which were vaguely socialistic insofar as their support for worker ownership, and for the same reason, because they basically recognized the pitfalls of capitalism and how capitalism could go horribly wrong. And they recognized that that was because private owners were not themselves the creator of value, but instead were just the owners of value. And the workers were the creators of value, but didn't reap its benefits. And so their solution was make them reap the benefits. They thought there should be worker-owned enterprises. There should be a proliferation of worker-owned enterprises. But it turns out, of course, that didn't happen, did it? As for it being, you know, his inspiration for leftism, I think that's a little weird. I think unless you maybe went through like an economics degree or something, you know, if you went through an economics degree and you read Smith, then I guess I might see that. But it's not as if Smith himself is a leftist. Yeah, that's kind of interesting, though. Neil Anderson, this is financial advice. Crypto sucks and don't bet on it. Yeah, you should all watch the Folding Ideas video on cryptocurrency. It's really good. It's literally called This is Financial Advice. That's funny. X Orpheus says, do you believe bread tubers will need to migrate over to an alternative creator control platform at some stage? And if so, do you believe some inroads are being currently made? Here's the problem. You're not going to be able to produce the same content economy as YouTube unless you have the same viewership as YouTube. So it's a terrible catch-22, and this is how all big platforms on the internet work, is that you have to somehow get both the vast user base and the main power users onto your new platform at the same time. And then there has to be some kind of catalyzing event that causes them all to move there. So like, it wouldn't matter, for example, okay, take Nebula. Okay, Nebula, it's becoming a relatively big platform, but they don't even have a viewership that scratches the surface in comparing to YouTube. And I doubt they will in the future. It doesn't seem like what's going to happen. So then it's not as if, for example, if I moved over to Nebula, that I am making something that's going to be a strong competitor to YouTube, because it just doesn't have the viewer base. In order for anything to compete with the model of YouTube, it would somehow have to get a viewer base like YouTube. But YouTube didn't create its viewer base by getting quote unquote power users to start it. YouTube started with like regular ass people filming grainy webcam videos in their garage, right? Like it got its start at the bottom like rung of internet culture, you know, like it built so slowly into what it is right now. It's just not, you can't just implement a replacement ipso facto. So even though there's some really cool alternatives, like PeerTube seems awesome. PeerTube seems like kind of like a more decentralized YouTube, but until it has the viewership of YouTube, you're not going to see a bunch of creators move over there. You know, the most that I'd be willing to do, for example, is just mirror my stuff. But even mirroring was a little bit of a pain. So we'll see. We'll see. I don't have a better answer for you than that. Johnny Bravo, do most anarchists agree with dialectical materialism? Believe it or not, I actually answered that question twice in this very stream. So afterwards you can listen back. And if the first answer doesn't please you, then I even give a second one. Oh, Charles Graves clarifies, I'm thinking more like as a means of exchange, or so left organizations have capital for projects or mutual aid. I will say that if you're going to generate capital on the stock market and then dump it into leftist orgs, that's great. That's great. I wouldn't say it's a highly generalizable technique, but if you can do it, I support you. Be the Ingalls of the anarchist movement. We'll take it. You know, Cooperation Tulsa, we'll take your stock money, you know, as long as there's no strings attached. I don't get that vibe from you though. So yeah. Claudia I think it said Borges. Hey, Anark, have you seen the most recent Some More News video about how entire economies in the internet are so dang fragile? No, like legit, I'm nervous to watch that video because I don't want to be filled with the existential dread of knowing that YouTube could fall apart and that I wouldn't have a career, you know, or like that I wouldn't have a job, you know, that'd be disturbing. I mean, I know it's true, right? It just seems kind of like a self-torture for me to watch. Kaiser 1987 says, Nebula exists. Most of BreadTube is on this and YouTube. In my opinion, creators get more money there, and I assume the extra work is not that much. I don't think most of BreadTube is over there. In fact, I don't know if I don't think there's any anarchist creators on BreadTube. It seems to me, as I understand it, Nebula chooses you, not vice versa. And I think that's a big limitation to Nebula's growth. It also just doesn't have nearly as much viewership. Yeah, Demon Prince says, also, those creator-owned platforms tend to come with a direct cost to the viewer, which reduces the migration of the viewer base. Exactly. Yeah, these are all huge problems. These are issues, you know? Like when people can view, as Demon Prince says, when people can view YouTube for free, they're less likely to pay to view Nebula. Precisely. Sim Not Sam says, you missed my comment earlier, but what about your thoughts about free speech absolutism? I mean, I don't believe in free speech absolutism. I don't think anybody actually believes in free speech absolutism. You know, obviously we could just start with, you know, nobody believes you should be able to shout fire in a crowded theater. You know, if there's a gun to somebody's head and they say, you know, if you say this person's name is Joe, I'll shoot them. And if you say their name is Bob, I won't. Their name's actually Bob and you say Joe. Yeah, you murdered that person. We don't actually believe in that, right? I've gathered that you all hear my computer sound, so I'll mute that. But yeah, no, I don't think anybody actually believes in free speech absolutism. The question is what you think the bounds of that free speech is. As for me, I don't want the government to I'll put it this way. I don't think Nazis should be allowed public platforms, but I also don't want a government that restricts free speech based on political ideologies, because I just don't really want to give that power to the state. Instead, I would say keep the free speech protections of the state as they are, but we need to do the work to make sure that those positions are just not practiced in public. Right. So it's kind of like, I don't want the state to change its laws. I just think that we need to make sure that Nazis don't get a platform. FIFA Fern asks, should you suffer for your art? I don't know about should, but if you must, then you should. Depends on how committed you are to your art, right? I mean, I've certainly suffered for my art. This channel is actually the first time in my life that I've been able to make creative work my job. Before this, you know, I've created art my entire life that I didn't get paid for, and which only a few people ever consumed. And yet I continued doing it. I think part of being an artist is that it's something you do for the joy of creation, and those who consume your work may be few and far between, but it's worth it, you know? Demon Prince says, be the angles of the anarchist movement, but please do not write another On Authority. We're still dealing with the fallout of the first edition. Yeah, agreed. Agreed. So I'm probably going to leave here in just the next few minutes because I do have to get ready for the rest of my day. Let's see. So yeah. Oh, Winter says Step Back History is an anarcho-communist on Nebula. Yeah, that's true. It's true. It's true. Yeah. Sufjan says, do you have any future plans to make a second channel? You know, I made a little channel that was all just like AI audiobook readings, but I just didn't really commit to it because it's a lot of work to manage a second channel. The only reason I would ever really think about creating a second channel for this is like, I don't know, like little clips of my videos here, you know, like sometimes people will create second channels for that, but it's kind of a lot of work. James Burbank says, do you think the philosophy of Nietzsche is useful to anarchism? You know, I found that I actually have a lot philosophically in common with Nietzsche. And there have been other anarchists which have actually recognized some commonalities with Nietzsche, which is funny because Nietzsche himself tried to separate himself from pretty much all leftist philosophies. There have also been other philosophical thinkers who consider themselves to be in the lineage of Nietzsche, like Deleuze and Guattari, who are also very anarchistic. So I think that there's definitely some overlap. And if you're interested in what I mean by that, if you are familiar with Nietzsche, you should go watch my video Power, and you'll probably see what I mean about those overlaps. Demon Prince says, before you go, what do you think about liberation theology? It's good. It's better than it not existing. Insofar as that Christianity is proliferated in society, it's better that a liberation theology is proliferated with it. It's certainly, the way I look at it is I'm not going to change people's religious views in mass. And so probably what we should do is just meet them where they're at. You know, if they're Christians, introduce them to Christian anarchism. If they're Buddhist, introduce them to Buddhist anarchism. If they're Islamic, or if they're Muslim, introduce them to Muslim anarchism, and so on. Harrison asks, how do you feel about your own gender? How has this process evolved through time? I'm very boring. I'm as cis as they come. You know, I've never had any internal conflict about my gender. I've never been in a process of wondering if I was or was not a man. I feel like I'm just a very, very stereotypically cis white male. Here I am. You know, I was born, I'm 6'3", broad-shouldered, deep-voiced, and so on. And that doesn't make me feel weird at all. That feels normal. You know, I feel at peace with my gender. That's what I'll say. Elixir says, thoughts on gender accelerationism or even heard of it? I've heard of it, but I don't really know the specifics well enough to make a comment on it. I think that's a Greek name, says, speaking of which, Anark, are there any Islamic anarchist writers or philosophers you'd recommend? Oh, there was one. What is it called? It's like Omar. Is it Omar Aziz? I think it's Omar Aziz, anarchist. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, I got the name right. Now I need to find the pieces. Yeah, Omar Aziz, A-Z-I-Z. I really enjoyed the work that I read by him, but I'm trying to find the name of it again. Wow, I'm finding out lots of things here. Apparently somebody made a video on this guy. He's Syrian, apparently.
Hi there.
Okay. I'm going down a rabbit hole here, everybody. Trying to find the actual piece. I discovered it through Zoe Baker. Zoe Baker recommended this piece by Omar Aziz. I just found a piece a YouTube video somebody made about him. I haven't watched it, so I'm linking this with a little bit of hesitation, but here's a YouTube video about this guy, about Omar Aziz. What is the name? A discussion paper on local councils. Pretty sure that's the one. Searching Google. Yes, I found it. I think this is it right here. The formation of local councils. This is the one. There we go. I'm going to link it in the chat. There we go. Boom. Excuse me. TKDR says, have you made or do you intend to make videos on historic examples of anarchism, such as on Makhno's Black Army? Yeah. I've said before that I do intend to make like the opposite of the statist counter-revolutionary about anarchist and libertarian socialist projects that I consider very notable. So it'd probably be the CNTFAI in Spain, the Free Territories in Ukraine, and then probably it would end on like the Zapatistas. You know, be about libertarian socialism, not just anarchism. Maybe the Shinmin commune as well. They say, the person I kept going, Greek letters. They say it's the name Komenos in Greek. Harrison, if you're 6'3" and broad-shouldered, how many historical anarchists do you think could beat you in a fight? At least Nestor Makhno. I mean, bro would just, he would handle me without any difficulty. I am sure of it. Dude was a legend. Let's see. Gwen Sutton says, what drew to you anarchism and what convinced you of it? Probably you should watch my Anarch Abridged, which I think is called My Journey to Anarchism. Probably very exactly what you're looking for. Ex-Orpheus, to what extent do you believe seaport blockades such as those that have occurred in Tacoma and Oakland over the last month are going to inhibit the genocide in Gaza? They will, but I would say they need to be carried out en masse. That in order for them to inhibit the genocide in Gaza, we need to have people all over the place doing it everywhere, constantly. It is a very good example of direct action, and in fact, we have direct parallels opposing the Nazi genocide of the Jews. There were lots of examples of people in factories and other such places blockading the supplies that were going to the Nazis for similar reasons. So it's something that should definitely be done. Sufyan says, any great starter anarchist pamphlets to pass out? You should definitely go watch the first part of my series Anarchist reading list, because it starts with some pamphlets, definitely, that you should go look at. Femboy Machno is historically canon. Damn, I didn't know that, but okay, I'm down. James Burbank says, you read a lot. Do you have a system or method to think about and remember what you read about? No, not really. You might be shocked to find how much of it I just forget. You know, like there are entire books and like essays and stuff that I've read and I've just totally forgotten. Like you just saw just a minute ago, like I'd read this essay by Omar Aziz, but I couldn't even remember the name of it, right? In my experience, it's most important that you take away from the piece you are reading key elements that are going to be useful for your synthesis of ideas. It is less important that you strictly memorize every single argument that's in the work. And it is more important that you understand how the arguments of that work are pertinent to you, your ideology, and your journey. And take on the criticisms that are offered, think about the concepts that are being discussed, but don't get too hung up on this idea that what you are supposed to do is memorize everything. Okay, that's a very, school-based way of thinking about things. I would recommend instead just try to focus on key details. Think about key details while you are reading and understanding. And you'll find those are often like keystones, and they'll lead you to remembering what the rest of the text was like. Harrison, what's your most controversial opinion among other social anarchists? Probably that detainment is necessary. Like really dangerous people do have to be kept away from others. You're in war, you're going to have a way to detain prisoners of war. In a future society, you're going to have a way to keep, I'm trying not to use the words which would get this demonetized, but also whatever. You would have to be able to keep rapists and murderers and exploiters away from the rest of the population. You will have to find a way to do that. And the alternatives of just murdering them or kicking them into the wilderness are not better. So I don't think that we want to recreate the prison system, but we probably need to think about how to keep those people out of the general population. That's a much longer conversation, though. Much longer conversation. Comeno says, Buenaventura Durruti would be a pretty hardcore in a fight too, probably. Yeah, I bet he'd kick my ass as well. Damn, I wouldn't even have a chance. Anarcho-Clownarchist says, what are good ways to get more people in the community interested in anarchist organization, building up alternative power structures? I'm having a hard time getting new people interested, or even me. I think that like tabling is a great way to go. Right? Just print out a bunch of like zines and stuff, and then like go to popular events with a table and just hand out zines and talk to people about anarchism. As simple as that sounds. So I think I'm going to call it there because I need time to get ready. But I appreciate everybody showing up. Here at the end, I will, of course, make one last obligatory pitch to go over and become a patron on my Patreon, which is patreon.com/anarch. Also, if you want to become a member on YouTube, as numerous people have discovered today, you can actually kind of do like a Patreon thing on YouTube. I think like down below, there's like some little thing you'll click that's like join or something. And it's kind of like a membership program. But Anyway, we're going to call it there. Just a little over 3 hours for this one. Next week, I will almost certainly be doing another video like the last one I did, kind of like a lecture once again, probably kind of like drawing on, using this pad that I was given. So, all right, everybody, I think I'm going to call it there. Appreciate you all showing up. Had a lot of good questions and a lot of good conversations. Anyway, I'll see you all next time.